Yo, what's good, Shinobi Nation? Welcome back to Just a Shinobi, the home of the craziest Naruto what ifs. Today, we're diving into part 4 of What If Naruto Has Melody of Fox. Let that sink in. Make sure you stick around, because once this starts, there's no turning back. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, and share this video with your entire ninja squad. And don't forget to drop your theories in the comments, because your support is what keeps this shinobi grinding. Now let's jump straight into it. Chapter 26. Tayuya sighed as she gazed out into the deep, foaming sea beneath her, sea blue eyes dazed and unfocused in thought as she leaned on the metallic railing of the ship. Her short, dark blonde hair blew powerfully in the breeze, wrapping languidly across her eyes and lips in a silky embrace. It didn't take a shinobi to see that she was lost in thought. Her expression constantly shifted between anger and embarrassment, both emotions due to the surprise kiss Musashi had given her 2 days ago. Not only had he stolen her first kiss from a boy, but he'd had the nerve to ask her to abandon the training trip in favor of settling down with him in the Wave Country. She had, admittedly, briefly considered what it'd be like to give up her life as a ninja and instead live as a housewife. They were right next to the beach. Musashi's family was pretty well off, for such a small town, and the town itself was pretty nice once you got used to it. She could actually see herself becoming a normal housewife, maybe even raising a kid or two once she got old enough. Luckily, though, her common sense kicked in just in time to remind her that this was the same boy whom she'd beat into a coma barely 3 weeks ago. Now, she'd dealt with her fair share of freaks in her short lifetime, and it didn't take much to notice the signs of a natural masochist. While she had been disturbed by this realization, she wasn't disturbed enough to let him off the hook with nothing less than a severe ass-kicking. Because he was on their property, and had called her out, no one had come down too hard on her for her actions, especially since he was already beaten and bruised from her first attack. His new bruises easily blended in with the old ones, and she'd pulled her punches just enough to avoid putting him into another coma. Sure, she'd accidentally broken both of his forearms, which he had been using to shield his face from further harm, but she thought she'd done well. Naruto, however, apparently didn't share her view. He barely uttered a word when she apologized for losing her temper again, something that was more than a little strange for the usually obnoxiously loud blonde. Even stranger was the frown that seemed to be permanently etched into his face. She'd never admit it, but it was a bit unnerving to not see the boy smiling. His anger didn't seem to be directed at her, per se, but she could tell that it had something to do with her. Every time their eyes met, the genin would quickly avert his gaze, almost as if he didn't even want to look at her. Although it had only been a couple of days, it felt like she hadn't spoken to him in years. Her thoughtful frown deepened into anger. She was getting a bit tired of dealing with Naruto and his rapidly changing moods. Unlike her former teammates who only had one mood, pissed off, the blonde could cycle through dozens within a period of 24 hours. It was getting to the point where she wasn't sure of which Naruto was the real Naruto. One thing she could be sure of, though, was that he definitely wasn't the same boy she'd left with over half a year ago. Her right ear twitched only slightly as the sound of footsteps reached her ears, and recognizing them as those of her bitch of a sensei, inwardly groaned. She knew it'd only be a matter of time before she was found, but she didn't think it'd be this soon. There were 3 decks on the transport, all of which were packed with people on their way to the Lightning Country. Along with her hair and eye color, she'd used the genjutsu to increase her height by a few inches and changed her skin color from a mildly orange tan to a very light peach. She'd modified her appearance shortly after boarding the ship, diving into the crowd in a desperate attempt to separate herself from the 3 other shinobi accompanying her. Both Anko and Jiraiya had been asking her the same exact question during their journey from the beach house to the Wave Country's main docks, and quite frankly, she was sick of it. As if knowing exactly what the girl was thinking, Anko leaned her back against the railing, bristling slightly as the hot metal met the bare skin of her back. "Are you going to tell me what happened? I'd really like to know why you beat him up a second time." Waving her hand, the genin dispelled the illusion. There was no use wasting her chakra by keeping it up now that she'd been found. She briefly considered using the Shunshin no Jutsu to put some distance between them and try it again, but Anko now knew that she was using a genjutsu to hide herself. It wouldn't be too hard for the woman to find her again. "Fuck off already. I didn't beat him into a coma, did I?" The jounin sighed. Dealing with teenagers and their mood swings was not her forte. Things like this were better suited to gentle people like Shizen. Then, at least tell me this. Did you have a reason for hitting him again? Did he physically touch you? You at least owe me an explanation for ending my vacation early. Taiya froze. What did she think happened? There were many different ways the question could be interpreted, and she wasn't sure what exactly the woman was getting at. She did, however, understand why Anko wanted an explanation. After she'd beaten the boy up for the second time, Jiraiya had decided that it'd be best for them to move unless they tarnished Konoha's reputation further. Needless to say, Anko had been thoroughly pissed off about losing nearly 2 weeks of her precious vacation time, expressing her anger by constantly hounding the girl for answers. Taiya slowly turned her head to meet the kunoichi's eyes, deciding it was better to just get her off of her back for the time being. Yeah. Anko nodded her head, seemingly satisfied with the answer. Okay, I'll let you off for the time being. But was it really worth the beat down you gave him? The girl scowled, instantly giving her answer. I guess that's a yes. She leaned her head back to stare at the sky, blowing a long purple bang out of her eyes. By the way, you might want to make up with Naruto while you still can. The genin absent-mindedly nodded her head, turning her eyes back to the sea below her. Things had gone well enough with Anko, so maybe when she talked to. Wait, what do you mean while I still can? She exclaimed, head snapping back around to look at the jounin. Anko let loose a small breath, unsure of how to answer the girl's question. While you were off brooding, Jiraiya called an emergency meeting. Turns out he and Naruto are going to infiltrate Kumogakure in an attempt to gain some information about their village. His data network had a large-scale breakdown a couple of months ago, and since we were somewhat in the area, he decided to fix things himself. The redhead glared up at her, pushing herself away from the metal railing. What? Why can't we go too? If he thinks Naruto can get into the village undetected, it should be 100 times easier for you and me. She frowned at the girl. Isn't it obvious? The more people there are, the greater the risk of being discovered. I wouldn't pick Naruto as my first choice either, but apparently, he's the most vital part of the mission. In any case, once we reach the outskirts of the village, we'll be splitting up into 2 groups. That gives you just over a day to say your goodbyes and whatever else you need to do to him. Don't waste what little time you have. Leaving Taiya to her own thoughts, Anko stood up and walked towards the other side of the ship, easily blending into the large crowd of travelers on the wooden deck. She'd thought about forcing her student to talk to Naruto, but the redhead had never taken too kindly to being forced into things. She glanced over her shoulder one more time and sighed. Dealing with teenagers definitely wasn't her specialty. 259, 260, 261, 262. Taiya watched nervously as Naruto performed his daily training ritual, trying her best to find a good time to interrupt. As pathetic as it was, she hadn't been able to work up the courage to talk to him all day. His body language was obviously saying stay the fuck away from me, and being unused to the standoffish aura he was emitting, she wasn't quite sure how to approach him. Giving up for what seemed like the millionth time that day, she fell back onto her bed with a sigh, closing her eyes in annoyance. Watching the blonde do push-ups on the hardwood floor of the room was just making her more nervous, if that was even possible. Since both Jiraiya and Anko were off attending the ship's complimentary dinner and ball, the 2 genin were pretty much left alone to do whatever they wanted, which would normally be a good thing if Naruto wasn't acting like a grade-A asshole. Feeling slightly nauseous from the somewhat rough swaying of the boat, the redhead once again sat up to stare at her teammate. 297, 298, 299, 300. Naruto gasped, falling to the floor in fatigue. His tongue hung out of his mouth in an amusingly over-exaggerated fashion, causing Taiya, despite her nervousness, to giggle lightly under her breath. Hey! Are you laughing at me? He scowled, childishly poking out his lower lip. Feigning shock, she placed her hand over her chest in an equally exaggerated manner. Why, Naruto, you know me better than that. Are you suggesting that someone as delicate and tender as I would laugh at your obvious exhaustion? When a wry grin stretched across his face to match her own, her eyes blinked in surprise at how easily the tense atmosphere between them had been broken. She quickly recognized this as her chance, and subconsciously leaning towards the still gasping blonde, furrowed her eyebrows into what she hoped was a serious expression. Are you mad at me for beating up Musashi again? Naruto blinked. Wow, that was straightforward. The redhead's concerned frown dropped into displeasure. Well? Are you or not? Suspiciously, his eyes quickly darted away from hers. I'm not. What makes you think I'm mad at you? If it was possible, Taiyuya's jaw seemed to literally drop into her lap. Gee, I don't know. Maybe because you haven't said one fucking word to me in 3 days? When his eyes continued to stay focused on the invisible object to his left, she huffed loudly and shrugged her shoulders. Forget it. I don't care anymore. If you want to beat around the bush like a pussy, that's fine with me. She angrily threw herself back onto her bed, glaring up at the spiraling pattern of the ceiling. What the hell ever happened to communication? He told her his concerns and misgivings, she acknowledged them and apologized, and bam, problem solved. What was he being so stubborn about? It had already been established that the second time wasn't her fault, and he was supposed to trust her when she said she had a good reason. Isn't that what they talked about after the first ass-kicking? For him to get all moody and mistrustful over something as trivial as a couple bruises and broken bones was idiotic at best. Hey, Taiyuya-chan, you've kissed someone before, right? Naruto mumbled, voice barely reaching the girl's ears. Her eyes widening, she shot back up into a sitting position, giving W what? How why the fuck are you asking me something like that? She didn't have to see them to know that her cheeks were burning. The blonde stiffly shrugged his shoulders, eyes still solidly focused on that same goddamn non-existent item. I dunno, I just thought you would. I mean, just in case you have, what did it feel like? Did you suddenly fall in love with the person after you did it? Contrary to popular belief, Taiyuya was not a very superstitious person. She didn't believe in fortune-telling, omens, horoscopes, bad luck, nor fate. As such, and unfortunately for Naruto, she didn't believe in overwhelming coincidences either. You followed me. His face morphing into horror, he quickly hopped to his feet and waved his hands in front of his face. And no, I didn't. I was just wondering. On the inside, the blonde winced. He knew he sucked at lying when it came to his precious people, and next to Sakura-chan, Taiyuya was by far one of the most precious. Rather than immediately blow up like he expected, the girl's mouth simply formed an obviously displeased straight line. Why? He sighed and hung his head slightly, finding his toes much more interesting than the intense glare he was currently receiving from Taiyuya. I don't know. I was just worried. You mean you didn't trust me? Surprised, Naruto snapped his head up to look at her with wide eyes. It's not that. When I saw it was Masashi who came to see you, well, I didn't know what he'd do. I mean, you did put him into a coma. So now you're saying I'm too weak to protect myself from a fucking cripple? The slight irony of her words weren't lost on either of them. His face descended into an annoyed expression, easily matching the one stretched across his teammate's face. You know what I mean? An odd, mild burning sensation in the bottom of her stomach fueled her rage, pushing her closer and closer to the edge of sanity. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You followed me because you obviously didn't believe a goddamn word I said about not being the same person I was before. Hot tears prickled at the back of her eyeballs, but she refused to let them fall. She'd be damned if she allowed herself to show weakness in front of him ever again. She should have learned her lesson after Orochimaru had tried to kill her all those months ago. The blonde's eyebrows furrowed in confusion and anger. She was flying off of the handle about nothing, and it wasn't making sense. Why is it such a big deal? Why can't you trust me when I say I was just worried about you? You know what? Fuck you. Don't try to pass it off as being worried about me. That shit might work on stupid cunts like Sakura-chan, but I'm smarter than that. I can tell the difference between being worried and just being mistrustful. She spat, making sure to put a little extra venom on the girl's name. She was angry, hurt, and betrayed, so she'd use anything and anyone to give him even a little bit of the pain she felt. Naruto's eyes darkened. Don't talk about Sakura-chan like that. You aren't even half as smart as she is. The words barely fazed her as she became more and more upset, and rolling her burning mahogany eyes, she choked out a pitiful laugh. Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. I'm the stupid one for believing all that bullshit about trust and friendship in the first place. Every fucking one of you are the same. All of you. You act like you like me, like you fucking care about me, but then you do shit like this behind my back as soon as I feel like I can trust you. I fucking knew this shit would happen. I can't believe I let myself get pulled in by your fucking fake words about precious people and making everyone recognize you. Well, guess what? You don't have to hear them for a whole fucking year. Aren't you happy? Now you can go back to Wave Country and marry Musashi like you wanted to in the first place. I saw you think about it, so don't let me hold you back. In fact, I support you. The girl's face morphed from anger into shock. She'd heard that he was leaving for a mission, but she hadn't heard that it'd be a year long. What the hell was he going to do for a year? What was she going to do? Her heart thumped painfully in her chest, and she hesitantly stood to her feet. Wait. I guess this is the thanks I get for being concerned about someone I thought was my best friend. Maybe you're right, maybe my words are fake. Maybe it's just me trying to fool myself into believing that I can make up for all those years of being alone by surrounding myself with as many friends as I can right now. Sorry for assuming that you'd be one of the most important ones. When she didn't say anything, he scowled and walked towards the door. Screw it, I'm going back to my room. By the time she opened her mouth to stop the blonde, the door had already slammed shut behind him. She stared at the dark slab of wood for what felt like hours, hardly believing what had just taken place. It wasn't supposed to go like that. Things were supposed to be fixed by now. They were supposed to be having fun and making the most of their last night together, not screaming at each other. She clenched her fists in anger, wishing that Musashi was in front of her so she could kick his ass to relieve some of her rage. Things never went the way she wanted it to. She should have known better. She always hoped for too much, only to be let down in the end. Suddenly feeling exhausted, she plopped back down onto the bed and turned towards the wall, glaring holes into the brushed aluminum of the boat's walls. She didn't want to calm down. In fact, she wanted to go into the next room and bash the idiot's face in for saying all that mean shit to her. He should have known that she didn't mean any of what she'd said. They had been together for over 8 months, so it wasn't like he couldn't tell when she was being serious or not. She wrapped her arms around her knees and deepened her scowl. It wasn't her fault at all. It was his fault for not trusting her. Wasn't that how this whole thing started? Because he'd followed her? It was only natural to be angry about something like that. That's how Anko found her, pissed off and curled up into a ball with her back to the door. Sighing deeply, she shed her trench coat and sat down on the bed next to the girl. You're hopeless, you know that? Unsurprisingly, Tayuya didn't answer. What did you do? Without so much as a twitch, a slow, wavering question floated from the genin facing the whitewashed wall of the room. Why do you always assume it's my fault? The woman paused momentarily to consider what she was about to do. Very few people knew anything about her early life, and she didn't particularly like recounting the darker days of her adolescence. Shrugging a fishnet-covered shoulder, she tentatively decided that a Cliff's Notes version should suffice. Although it's embarrassing to admit, I was very similar to you at my age. After Orochimaru ditched me, I spent most of my time blaming everyone else for my anger, most often those closest to me. For a while, I believed that everyone was an enemy, or had an ulterior motive. I lost a lot of friends that way. The teenager grunted loudly, still refusing to look at her teacher. Am I supposed to feel better about myself or something? No, you're supposed to feel worse. Look, I won't pretend to know what your life's been like, and quite frankly, I don't give much of a damn. However, I don't want to see you do something stupid and end up regretting it for the rest of your life. I can't make you do anything, but I really do think it would be in your best interest to at least attempt to make up with Naruto. Finally moving, she rolled over to glare at Anko. Because I won't see him for a year? Anko blinked in mild surprise, a little put off by the girl's question. She'd been hoping to keep it as a secret, at least for the first couple of months until Tayuya got used to being without Naruto. So he told you? Yeah, he did. Well, all the more reason to see him off on good terms. If you're not careful, some Kumo slut will dig her claws into him. Despite herself, a small grin appeared on Anko's face at the brief flash of anger that flew across her student's face. She was so dishonest with herself that it was almost cute. Think about it, okay? I'm going to take a dip in the pool. Without so much as a warning, the woman stripped off her clothes and pulled on her bathing suit, causing Tayuya to turn her head away in disgust. Even if they were both females, she didn't like to make a habit of seeing Anko nude. With a final, cheeky wave, the jounin slipped out the door and headed towards the deck below, glad to be away from the air of gloom surrounding Tayuya. She reached the pool in a matter of minutes, and not sensing anyone else around, carefully slid into the large, heated body of water. She considered swimming a few laps around the pool to work off the insane amount of food she'd eaten that night, but decided against it. It'd burn itself off after a good night's sleep anyway. A light, mildly creepy giggle hovered from an especially dark corner of the pool area, instantly grinding against her nerves. So much for relaxing. Closing her eyes in annoyance, she glared pointedly at the shivering shrub to her left. Sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not naked right now. Shortly after she'd spoken, Jiraiya appeared from behind the suspiciously placed bush, obviously displeased with her statement. Damn. They should really install hot springs into these things. So, trying to get away from Naruto's depressing atmosphere? She asked, not so subtly ignoring his statement. The old man frowned deeply, crossing his arms over his chest. As I thought, it has something to do with Tayuya. I'm far too old to be dealing with teenagers and their hormones. Anko barked out a short laugh, remembering how she'd thought the same exact thing not even 12 hours ago. Tell me about it. My guess is that Taya-chan started it. She was probably a bit anxious about being separated from her best friend. The mirth quickly leaving her face, she tilted her head back to look at Jiraiya with an equally displeased frown. Does it really have to be a year? Already predicting the question, Jiraiya silently sighed to himself. Give or take a couple of months, yes. The truth is, I'm not expecting it to take more than 7 or 8. Then again, one can never be sure when it comes to human emotions. They may even kill him outright under suspicion of being a spy. She openly gaped at him, pushing herself away from the pool wall to turn around and look him straight in the eyes. And you're putting him at that sort of risk, why? Like I said before, he's the only one I know that can do it. As you've seen firsthand, he has the ability to win over practically anyone. Even the most violent and ruthless of people will eventually come to like the boy. I'd even go as far as to say that Orochimaru would like him if they were given a few months together. She brushed off his statement about Orochimaru with barely a blink, continuing to glare at the white-haired man. I understand your reasoning, but Naruto's just a genin. You honestly can't expect him to fool an entire village of shinobi, can you? She asked, unconsciously raising her voice a level. He won't necessarily be fooling them. He'll be living amongst them to get a feel for their ways, and most importantly, to find out if there are any in Kumogakure. Anko rolled her eyes in revulsion. So you're using him as a demon radar device. Nice. Jiraiya's eyes hardened in anger. Regardless of how you feel on the matter, that's the way it's going to be. When we started this mission, Tsunade and I told you that. Yeah, I know. Geez, do you have to bring that up every single time I disagree with you? She exclaimed, throwing her hands into the air. Yes, because it's the most effective way of ending the argument. She huffed and looked away, crossing her arms under her chest. Point taken. Realizing that she'd lost this battle, she sighed and turned her eyes on the Toad Sage once again, a pleading frown marring her normally mischievous face. Can you at least promise me that you won't let Naruto get into anything too dangerous? If you don't, well, I'd hate to see what Tsunade-sama has to say about something like this, she threatened, knowing full well how much Jiraiya feared his well-endowed teammate. Predictably, the old man's face visibly paled at the thought of the kind of damage the Hokage would do to him if something happened to Naruto. Fine, I suppose I can guarantee that much. Just remember that he's still a shinobi of Konoha, and doing missions like these is also a part of being a ninja. With that, the old man exited the pool area, effectively ending the conversation before she could get another word in. As soon as she was sure that he'd left, she sank down into the water with a scowl, leaving only her face above the surface. Pompous asshole. The trail leading to Kumogakure was deathly quiet as the 4 shinobi trudged towards their destination. Both Naruto and Tayuya were walking with obvious stiffness, eyes darkened with fatigue and anxiousness. It didn't take much more than a glance to see that the two of them hadn't gotten a lot of sleep the night before. Frowning at the uncomfortably tense atmosphere, Anko pasted on a smile and threw her arms around the genin's shoulders. Hey, why the long faces? It's only a year, and the next time you see each other, you'll both be older and stronger. I can't wait to see you two spar the next time we meet. I wonder who'll win? Her eyes twitched in mild annoyance as her question was quite ignored. The redhead roughly pushed the woman's arm off of her shoulder, shooting her a glare that she hoped was menacing enough to make her back off. What the fuck were you talking about? I'm gonna win easily, just like last time. Naruto's eyebrows shot up into his forehead as he snapped his head around to look at her. What? Last time was luck, and I let you win. Tayuya snorted and crossed her arms, a small smirk appearing on her face as she did so. Which is it? You can't say that it was luck and that you let me win. Dumbass. He opened his mouth to retaliate, but quickly realized that she was right. With a frown, he shut his mouth and stuck his tongue out at her in a very Naruto-ish fashion, earning himself another snort from the girl walking on the other side of Anko. Yeah, well, you'll see. When I come back, I'll be way stronger than you. I'll know like 1,000. And I'll use 5 swords. No, 10. As the teens argued, either one of them noticed the discreet smirks and thumbs up the two adults were sending towards each other. It would have been horrible for the kids to part on such bad terms, but watching them trade verbal blows made them both feel as if everything would be alright. Well, as alright as things could be given the situation. Fighting to keep from laughing at her teammate's fierce declaration, Taiya lifted an amused eyebrow. 10 swords? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, and you've said a lot of stupid shit since we've been hanging out. Her face immediately soured after spoke. She'd inadvertently reminded herself and apparently Naruto too, as his face also dropped into depression of the fact that the two of them wouldn't be seeing each other for a long time. Or if things went bad with his mission, ever again. Geez, just when things were going so well, Anko mumbled to herself, lazily rolling her eyes. Okay, let's not get all bitchy and moany again, alright? We should be getting fairly close to the village border, so… Actually, we're already here. The entire group paused to stare at the man. Being the first to recover from the shock, the Jounin opened her mouth to speak. Are you serious? Jiraiya nodded his head, a mild frown on his face. I'm afraid it's time that we split up. Going any further together could jeopardize the mission. The woman sighed deeply. She was hoping they'd have another half-hour together, at the very least. Fine. Then, let's give the chibis a few minutes alone to say their final farewells. She stepped forward and enveloped the blonde in a quick hug, purposefully pushing his face into her fishnet-covered breasts with a smirk. Later, Nara-chan. Don't cheat on Taya-chan while you're away. With that, both Anko and Jiraiya nodded towards each other, turned around and headed in opposite directions, leaving the teens to catch up whenever they finished. The genin stared at each other shyly, melancholy and loneliness evident on their features. Now that they were actually parting for good, the weight of the situation was finally settling in. A year was a long time to be apart. Hell, they hadn't even been together for that long. To her surprise, the blonde slowly wrapped his arms around her in an awkward hug, giving her a warm, pleasant feeling in the bottom of her stomach. See ya, Taiya-chan, he muttered into her hair. He knew she could feel his heartbeat against her chest, and if he didn't know any better, he'd think that Jiraiya and Anko both could feel it from their position a few yards away. Swallowing heavily, Taiya too wrapped her arms around him, gripping him tighter than she ever had before. Yeah, see you. She gave the mental command for her arms to let go, but annoyingly, and somewhat unsurprisingly, they refused to heed her demand. It seemed that Naruto was having the same problem, as he still hadn't managed to release his own arms from her waist. Finally, the blonde moved, though not in the way she expected. Something smooth, firm, and moist brushed against her cheek, sending flames throughout her veins. Before she could figure out what had happened, he quickly slipped out of her arms and scampered a few feet away, face a light red with embarrassment. Her own face heating up, she pointed a disbelieving finger in his direction. Did you just… Yep. See you next year, Taiya-chan. He called, waving his arm wildly as he backed away from his still shocked teammate. She watched in a mild state of detachment as Naruto turned to follow his teacher down the path leading to Kumogakure, a suspiciously cheerful skip in his step. Chapter 27. Loosely gripping the handle of her katana in her right hand, Taiya smoothly brought the edged weapon down across the hastily set up target, easily slicing the poor logman in half. Without slowing her momentum, she twirled herself into a spinning crouch, slicing the feet off of her imaginary opponent. In the same movement, she popped up into the air and kicked the head off of one opponent, cut another wooden target in half, and stabbed forward to put a small hole in the stomach of the final remaining enemy before shooting her eyes up towards the small stopwatch hanging from the tree in front of her. She couldn't help it, she smirked. For what seemed like a million fucking years, she'd been practicing the same kata over and over again, struggling to get her time down to exactly 1 second. Judging by the watch dangling directly within her line of sight, she'd managed to get it down to 55 milliseconds, quite an achievement, if she didn't say so herself. The girl wiped at her brow with the back of her hand, glaring up at the burning ball of fire above her. Fucking summer. Fucking fire country. Fucking sun. Having lived in both the Earth country and Sound Village for the majority of her life, she wasn't at all used to this abnormally hot weather. Her orange short-sleeved shirt clung to her back for dear life, and the insides of her black spandex shorts felt like a swamp. Breaking her perfect posture for the first time since she'd begun training, she slumped over and began to walk back towards camp, sheathing her sword and throwing it over her shoulder to keep it from dragging the ground. It wasn't like Anko was around to get on her for not being all straight-laced and prissy, anyway. The older woman had mysteriously left earlier that morning, claiming that she was going to meet a new client for a mission since they were running a bit low on funds. Tayuya's nose crinkled in distaste at the thought. She hated missions. Don't get her wrong, she usually loved going on missions, when they involved either fighting, killing, death, or killing. Anything else was boring and a complete waste of her talents and time. Sometimes, she could even appreciate the occasional escort or kidnapping mission, but the missions Anko had been sending her on mostly involved things like helping an old man patch his roof or finding the Fire Lord's wife's cat. God, she hated that cat. Bottom line, Anko leaving was always a bad thing. Not only was Tayuya left alone for sometimes days at a time, but when the bitch finally came back, she usually had bad news. It was getting to the point where she was starting to wish that she never came back. Groaning loudly to herself, Tayuya wearily laid down on the sweet-smelling grass that surrounded their camp. If there was one good thing she could say about the fire country, it was that it had a hell of a lot of trees. Shade was never a problem for her, and it made the sun much more bearable in the warmer months. Lost on the road of life, Taya-chan? An annoyingly sweet voice called from the treetops, causing the redhead's eye to twitch in agitation. Speak of the devil. Shut the fuck up. She didn't even blink when Anko's upside-down face suddenly appeared within her line of sight, eyes literally 3 inches away from her own. Got a mission for us. We're escorting an old man from the lightning country to the fire country. The redhead closed her eyes in an attempt to stem her anger. She didn't really want to ask, and she was certain that she knew the answer already, but the curiosity was killing her. When? Anko shot her an evil grin, telling her everything she needed to know. Right now. Get packed, we're leaving. Tayuya rolled up onto her knees and glared hard at the jounin, hoping her stare was enough to make the evil snake woman's head explode. After a few seconds of intense eye-focusing action, she sadly realized that she hadn't yet mastered that particular art, and decided to use a bit of her negotiation skills to help Anko understand her concerns. What the fuck? I just finished training for like 5 fucking hours, at your insistence, and now you tell me that we have a mission? What the hell is wrong with you? Can't you at least give me 1 second to clean myself up? The woman gave her a toothy grin and held up a single finger. 1. Are you done cleaning up? We can't keep him waiting. Left without a choice, the genin reluctantly rose to her feet and began to throw her things into her bag, mumbling insults and threats of permanent maiming under her breath all the while. After spending exactly 5 minutes gathering their things and cleaning up the campsite, the two of them set out for the border of the lightning country. They weren't far, only a day or so on foot, and 4 or 5 hours if they took to the trees. Not bad for an escort mission, since their clients usually wanted to travel much further. Last time they'd escorted someone from the lightning country, the person had asked to be escorted directly to Sunagakure, and then insisted on going right back after realizing that they'd forgotten their favorite sleeping pillow. She couldn't complain much since the guy had paid well enough for her to get quite a few new music books and another special gift, in fact, but still. It was a total waste of her time that could have been better spent training to help Naruto take on Orochimaru. Taya-chan, your posture. Stand up straight, and wipe that scowl off of your face. I want you to meet this guy with a smile. He's a very important person in the shinobi world, and I hear he tips well if his escorts are fun to be around. Tayuya's frown deepened. She hated acting all prissy and perfect just to please their clients. According to Anko, though, it was a very important part of being a shinobi. Yeah, I got it. How's this? She put on an obviously fake smile, tilted her head to the left, and straightened her back until her head hung back at a sickeningly awkward angle. Perfect, keep that up and we'll be sure to get an extra 10,000 yen. The girl's jaw dropped in surprise, and she snapped her head around to look at her teacher. Are you serious? Of course I am. If I tell him you're retarded, I'm sure we can get some pity money. Tayuya scowled again and crossed her arms. Oh haha, very fucking funny. Really, where do you come up with this shit? It's hilarious. I mean, you should host your own comedy club or something. Quit your life as a shinobi and travel the world as a professional. I'm sure you'd make it big. Really? When her comment went unanswered, she rolled her eyes and turned to look at the road ahead of her. It had been over a year and a half since they'd been traveling together, and during that time, she'd learned that Enko just couldn't be baited. The woman had a strange knack for weaseling herself out of both arguments and accusations, and she could easily get you riled up before you knew it. Even Naruto, the most annoying brat on the planet, had admitted once or twice that he found their Jounin-sensei irritating. Her eyes softened slightly as she thought about her blonde teammate. As sad as it was, she could barely remember what it was like to be around him. It was getting harder and harder to remember all of their inside jokes, the pranks they'd pulled, the conversations they'd had, and the things they'd done together. Even his face was beginning to get a little fuzzy in her mind, and she'd spent more hours than she could count just staring at his face while he slept. Her cheeks warmed slightly at that embarrassing thought, but she was quick to squash the blush before it spread to the rest of her face. The last thing she needed was for Enko to notice and say something snide about her and Naruto's relationship. Even after months of explaining that she and her teammate were just good friends, the woman still kept saying that they made a good couple. To Enko, everything she did involved Naruto. If she trained extra hard, she was training to keep her body in shape for him. If she suddenly took an interest in something girly, she was doing it to make herself a better housewife. If she suddenly came down with a fever, it was because she missed Naruto and the stress of him not being there was making her sick. There was just no winning. She angrily kicked a large rock out of her way, smirking slightly as it embedded itself into the trunk of a large tree. Still, though, she had to admit that the bitch knew what she was talking about when it came to training. Her legs had never been stronger, and her taijutsu form was flawless. She'd even begun to learn a secondary no-sword style to prepare for the rare occasion that she either lost her weapon or her main fighting style became ineffective. Another cool side effect of her training was that she was fast, blazing fast. Her leg weights were 125 pounds each. Her arm weights only weighed in at around 65 pounds or so, but according to Enko, her legs were much more important to her life as a kunoichi. She had yet to figure out what the woman meant exactly, but somehow, she knew it wasn't good. Look alive. We're approaching the border, Enko whispered, eyes narrowing in a rare display of seriousness. Tayuya instantly snapped to attention, squinting into the thick fog separating the two borders. She'd always hated this part of the escort process. They basically had to sit on their hands and wait to see if their client would emerge from the mist and hope that it wasn't some rogue or Kumo ninja looking for trouble. The fog was impossible to blow away, and it seemed thick enough to cut with a knife. She was tempted to take out a kunai and see for herself if it would work. The sudden appearance of a large, dark shadow immediately set her on edge. When Enko had said that they were escorting an old man across the border, she was expecting someone about her or Enko's height and stature, not this giant. She could safely say that this man was a little under twice her size and probably well over twice her weight as well, which wasn't saying much, since she had only recently passed the 110-pound mark. Enko placed her hand on the girl's shoulder, squeezing it lightly to get her attention. He has someone else with him. It could be a Kumo shinobi escorting him to the border, so be ready to fight. Despite the situation, Tayuya felt herself smile. Finally, some action. She hadn't had a real fight in months, and she was itching to slam her blade into the throat of the next person that looked at her the wrong way. She squinted and struggled to catch a glimpse of the second person, her smile widening as she finally located the ninja Enko was talking about. The person was close to reaching the old man's shoulder, and seemed to walk like a male. She couldn't figure out what his body shape was like since it looked as if he was wearing some sort of cloak, but she could easily see the man's long, spiky hair in the distance. I can take him, she scoffed, hand resting on the katana at her side. They'd be reaching their client in a few seconds, and she wanted to be sure that she got the first swipe. Are you sure you want to? Tayuya furrowed her brows and shot her eyes towards the woman at her side, an angry frown on her face. Are you saying I can't? Enko shrugged her shoulders. No, I'm just saying that you should be careful. This guy probably isn't a pushover. We'll see about that. Before Enko could stop her, Tayuya shot forward at a blinding speed, intent on ending the fight before it started. She unsheathed her katana and plunged it into the man's heart, delighting in the wet, squelching sound that sealed his defeat. Unfortunately, she wasn't counting on the man being fast enough to replace himself with a log. "Shit, Kawarimi," she mumbled, speedily jumping back just in case the old man also decided to attack. The familiar whistling of a kunai headed in her direction piqued her interest, and smirking at the amateurish attack, she easily tilted her head to the left and avoided it. Her smirk was quickly replaced by a look of surprise when a second kunai, hidden in the shadows of the first one, nearly struck her directly between the eyes. The only thing that saved her were her admittedly improved reflexes, thoroughly polished from having random items, weapons, and animals thrown at her when she least expected it by her bitch of a sensei Anko. Maybe this guy had some skill after all. She ducked under a powerful kick, eyes widening even more at the vicious wind that passed over her head. If a kick like that connected, she doubted the seal Tsunade had given her would fix the damage. Somehow, reattaching a decapitated head didn't seem within the scope of the Sozo Saisen. Thinking quickly, she brought her sword straight up towards his head, frowning when the man once again dodged her slash. She could only vaguely see the smaller man's silhouette in the fog, making it even harder to connect her attacks. Tayuya sheathed her sword with a smirk. No matter. She wasn't as good with a sword as she was with her legs anyway. Not giving the man time to react, she threw a roundhouse kick towards the place she believed his head to be. When he dodged that, she took to the ground with the intention of sweeping his feet out from under him. Annoyingly, he dodged that one too and attempted to stomp on her fully extended leg. If it weren't for her rigorous, hellish months of training, she was certain that the attack would have left her crippled for life. Instead, she flipped back onto her right hand, using the momentum to spin herself around and back onto her feet. Without giving her time to gain her bearings, the man was on her in milliseconds. He launched limb after limb at the off-balance redhead, forcing her to back up lest she be knocked to the ground by his powerful attacks. With each punch or kick, she could literally feel the wind pass by her, helping her to realize that she'd vastly underestimated the Kumo shinobi. She was avoiding his assault by the skin of her teeth, and deciding that enough was enough, she discreetly reached into her pouch and threw a kunai towards his head to give herself enough time to get away. Her hands forming a single seal, she teleported herself back to her original position next to Anko, eyebrows furrowed as she tried to understand what was going on. She looked up at the woman with a scowl. "Alright, I'll admit the motherfucker isn't a pushover. I can take him, but not with my pack and these weights on. Do I have permission to take them off?" The knowing smirk that suddenly appeared on the Jounin's face instantly made her suspicious. She was smiling? At a time like this? It was as if she knew who the people approaching them were. The redhead's thoughts stopped in their tracks. Wait. Knew who the people were? Could it be possible that their client was Tayuya-chan? A husky, teenage voice asked from the fog, a hint of excitement in the boy's tone. Tayuya's normally powerful legs suddenly felt weak. It couldn't be. No, she was definitely hearing things again. This shit always happened when they had a mission that involved the Lightning Country. She'd get her hopes up thinking that they were going to join up with Naruto and Erosenin only to be let down in the end. She'd made a promise to herself to not be fooled by the illusions of the fog, but just in case. Naruto? As if he had been waiting for her to say his name, the grinning face of her teammate suddenly appeared in front of her, his blue eyes twinkling in delight. Before she herself knew what had happened, Tayuya dropped her pack and literally threw herself at the blonde. Anticipating her approach, Naruto opened his arms wide and waited, only to receive a vicious punch in the stomach. He fell to his knees with a grunt, both arms wrapped around his throbbing abdomen. "What the hell, Tayuya-chan?" he groaned, agony apparent on his features. The girl stared down at him with an angry frown. "You're lucky that's all I did to you for that kiss, faggot." Her words were harsh, but the wide, excited smile on her face instantly erased any maliciousness from her statement. She helped him stand to his feet before stepping back and looking him over. A lot had changed in 11 months. When they parted, the blonde had been roughly around her height, and probably somewhere around her weight as well. His hair had looked somewhat like a piece of sliced kamaboko if you squinted a bit, and to be honest, there had been some sort of aloofness to his general posture. Now, though, he looked completely different. Besides the obvious difference in his height, his body in general looked bigger. He'd allowed his unruly yellow hair to grow down to his nose, and without a headband covering his forehead, his bangs hung low down over his eyes, giving him a bit of a mysterious appearance. Her eyes shifted lower to take in his attire, and she was a little surprised to see that there wasn't much orange in his outfit at all. Other than a strange, orange symbol sewn into the chest of his tight-fitting black shirt and a bright orange sash that seemed to serve as both a belt for his long black pants and a holding place for his katana, he was completely devoid of his favorite color. He also wore a simple black jacket over his shirt, showing off the strange necklace he'd received from Tsunade. "You got taller," she commented, eyes reluctantly drifting from his attire to meet him. She hadn't expected him to grow so much in only a year. She had been expecting him to grow 1 or 2 inches in the time they'd been apart, but the blonde had shot up by at least 4. She actually had to tilt her head back a bit just to look him in the eyes. Naruto mischievously shrugged his shoulders and smiled. "You didn't grow at all." When her light brown eyes narrowed, he quickly looped one arm over her shoulders and pulled her closer, catching his teammate off guard for the second time since they'd met. "At least vertically," he finished, eyes glancing pointedly at her chest. Her cheeks flushed a light shade of red, and she jabbed him roughly in the side to make him let go of her shoulders. "Since when were you such a pervert?" The genin laughed and shrugged again, watching in amusement as she crossed her arms over her chest in a futile attempt to hide herself from view. "Hey, I had a good teacher." When both Anko and Tayuya turned to glare at the unusually quiet Toad Sage, the old man waved his hands defensively in front of his face. "Don't look at me. I practically dumped him in Kumogakure for a few months and left." The eerie silence that filled the clearing instantly told the man that he'd said the wrong thing. "You what?" Both Anko and Tayuya yelled, eyes filled with anger and disbelief. The fact that he'd recklessly left Naruto to fend for himself in enemy territory both appalled and shocked the Kunoichi. They'd been under the impression that Jiraiya would be in Kumo with him. Before the situation could get any more out of control, Jiraiya placed his hands on the shoulders of the irate women, slightly surprising them with how quickly he'd moved. Now, let's not cry over what's already happened. Instead, let's look to the future. Tell you what, instead of having to camp outside on our first night back together, let's spend the night at a hot spring. I'll even take you all out to dinner, my treat. What do you say?" The 3 shinobi exchanged glances and nodded, obviously pleased with this latest development. It had been a while since they'd all been able to share a meal together, and they were itching to see what each other had been up to over the past year. Secretly, Tayuya was also hoping to remove the awkwardness that had developed between her and Naruto. It wasn't so much that she was uncomfortable around him as it was that she didn't exactly know what she could say to him. They'd both changed a lot in the year they'd been apart, and somehow, she doubted that their old jokes would be as funny or make as much sense as they did before. They were basically starting from square one all over again, and would have to learn any new quirks and habits the other had picked up during their training. Seeing that he'd avoided being beaten into the ground, at least for the moment, Jiraiya quickly began to set off down the path leading back towards the Fire Country. "Alright, let's not dawdle for too long, we are still on the Lightning Country's border, after all. We should also hurry on to the next town before it gets dark." While Anko sped up to talk with Jiraiya, Tayuya slowed her pace to match that of her teammates. "So," she started, glancing up at the blonde, "how was Kumogakure? Make any new friends?" Naruto's face instantly lit up at her question, and he turned to look at her with a full, foxy, familiar grin. "I made tons. There's Killer Bee, Omoi, Samui, Old Man Raikage, Yugi-chan, and—" "Yugi-chan?" she asked, cutting him off before he could finish. She lightly bit the inside of her lip at her eagerness. Hopefully he wouldn't pick up on it. Her fears were put to rest when he widened his smile and nodded. "Yeah, she's like me. Killer Bee is, too. They taught me a lot of stuff about controlling my own demons." She lifted her eyebrows in surprise. How the hell did that work? Surely they picked up on the fact that since he had the QB sealed inside of him, he must be from Konoha. That was the last place the great beast was spotted, and as far as she knew, Kumo and Konoha weren't on the best of terms. Seeing the question on her face, Naruto quickly elaborated. "They didn't trust me at first, and Yugi-chan even tried to kill me, dozens of times, actually. But once we got to talking about the Akatsuki, we all came to a mutual understanding that it'd be best if we worked together so that they didn't get us all. Apparently, they're trying to catch us and make us into a super weapon or something to control the shinobi world. How, I don't know, but that's what they seem to think given the information they have." Tayuya's frown deepened. She didn't like the sound of that at all. "Have you told Jiraiya? Did they teach you anything useful? Something that can be used against Akatsuki?" The genin nodded his head, shooting her what he hoped was a comforting grin. He hated seeing her all uptight and worried. Yeah, I told him, and yeah, even though Kyubi's still an asshole, we've worked something out. Sort of. A sour look appeared on his face as he spoke, but it eventually turned into another wide smile. Yugi-chan helped me a lot as far as talking to the bastard goes. She spent weeks teaching me how to meditate and look within myself, and even helped me to draw out the Kyubi's chakra when I needed it. I mean, I still can't use that much without losing it, but I can use three tails just fine. If it was possible, the scowl on her face etched itself even further into her skin. That entire sentence pissed her off. Never mind that whole thing about Yugi-chan, she'd seen what the fox's chakra did to him. Every time he used it, he was in pain. She thought she'd made it clear that he'd be better off relying on his own abilities, but apparently, her opinion didn't matter to him at all. He'd much rather listen to what some cocksucking demon slut had to say over the girl who'd seen him hit rock bottom. Yugi-chan hadn't been there when Juro had died. She hadn't seen his face when he'd killed the Soundnin Misumi, nor that root officer over a year ago. What about you? Did you make any new friends? Does anything cool happen? Even though she wanted to answer with tales of perverted old men and equally perverted old women, her mind was still too pissed off to put together a logical thought. It was like he'd completely forgotten what using the Kyubi's chakra did to him. Was she the only one who cared? And why should she? If he wanted to fuck up his own body and mind, then fine, it wasn't her problem. Not really, she spat, keeping her eyes straight ahead. Naruto noticeably blanched. He knew that tone well. Having spent the majority of his time around Yujutoni, he was now able to discern when a girl was being, well, catty, for lack of a better word. The only problem was, he still had trouble figuring out why. I don't suppose you're going to tell me what I did to make you angry, huh? When she didn't answer, he let loose a deep sigh. When Shikamura had uttered that women were troublesome all those months ago, he hadn't been able to understand what the chunin meant, not that anyone could blame him since his experience with females was limited, to say the least. But after spending nearly 2 years with 3 especially opinionated women, he could now fully understand what the lazy chunin had been trying to say at that time. Women were, indeed, troublesome. He couldn't for the life of him understand why she was upset, though. He glanced over at Tayuya with a frown. He could tell she was pissed off. Her jaw was tense, her brows were furrowed, and her entire body seemed to be vibrating from rage. She stomped along the path with purpose, tightening her fists at her sides with obvious anger. Despite this fact, the blonde couldn't help but grin. This was the Tayuya he missed while training in Kumo. This was the fireball redhead he'd often thought about during breaks in training or before falling asleep at night. Still, there was something different about the girl that he just couldn't place. Of course, there were the obvious differences. Her long, cherry-red ponytail that used to reach the small of her back now hung to the area just below her shoulder blades, and her previously long bangs were now cut short in a straight line over her eyes, easily shielding the light brown orbs from view if she tilted her head down. Another huge difference was in her attire. She still wore her favorite black spandex training shorts, although they seemed a lot shorter than he remembered, but instead of regular shinobi sandals, she now sported the heeled sandals he'd seen on both Shizen and the Godame. Long, baggy white leg warmers covered her shins in what he assumed was an attempt to hide her training weights, and a similar pair of sleeves adorned her forearms. Complete with a loose black tank top and a large black belt that held her sword and kunai pouch, he could safely say that she looked significantly different from when he'd last seen her. His grin widened a bit more at the angry girl in front of him. Yeah, it was definitely true that people only realized someone's importance once they were gone. It was great to have her back at his side. So then, Taya-chan, she. Before she could finish her sentence, Anko fell into a fit of semi-drunken laughter, sloshing her beer all over the table of the restaurant. Tayuya rolled her eyes. She was used to this. She couldn't count the times the jounin had dragged her out to drink, especially when she had found out that she'd turned 16 and was of legal drinking age. Personally, she could never understand the appeal of beer. Not to say that she never had it, but the stuff smelled and tasted like water, piss, rubbing alcohol, and grease mixed together. Okay, so she was exaggerating a bit. The point is, she didn't particularly like the stuff. She reached for her iced tea and took a long swig from the glass, sighing loudly as she slammed the cup against the table. It had been a while since she'd had such a grand meal, and who knew when they'd get to eat this well next? Rudely reaching across the table, she snatched a piece of sashimi from Naruto's plate, earning a frown from the blonde currently stuffing his face. Hey! He yelled, mouth stuffed with fish, that was mine. Tayuya turned her fiercest glare on the boy, instantly silencing his protests. Shut up. With that, she easily chewed and swallowed his fish, secretly delighting in the equally angry glare he sent back at her. What's this? You two re-fightin' already? Anko grinned, taking another sip from her beer mug. That won't do. The family's all back together again. We should celebrate. Before the girl could blink, Anko poured the foul-tasting liquid down Tayuya's throat, forcing her to swallow lest she drown. She managed to get nearly half the mug down her throat before the genin was finally able to push the woman away, coughing and sputtering in an attempt to catch a breath of air. What the fuck are you doing? She screeched. Are you trying to fucking kill me? Even though she hadn't swallowed that much of Anko's beer, Tayuya still felt her head begin to swim a bit. She never had much of a tolerance for alcohol, and even a few swallows of beer was enough to make her feel lightheaded for a short while. Not wanting to get any more tipsy than she already was, she slowly stood to her feet. I'm going back to the room, she said, angrily stepping over Anko to get out of the booth. To her surprise, Naruto also stood up, shoving as much of his leftover meal into his mouth as he could. He swallowed the last of Tayuya's remaining drink and slipped out of the booth behind her. When she raised her eyebrows at him, he grinned innocently and shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. I'll walk you back. Why? I can take care of myself. As soon as the words left Tayuya's mouth, Anko frowned and shook her head to show her disapproval. Noticing this, the redhead quickly corrected herself. I mean, sure, if you want. She slowly swayed towards the door, Naruto hot on her heels. How cute. I wish I had someone like that, Anko murmured, taking another swig from her beer as she watched them go. I don't think those two should get much closer than they already are. It's okay, isn't it? I've been with her for a year, and despite what we thought in the beginning, Tae-chan actually has a pretty good head on her shoulders. She's just a little socially retarded, and being with Naruto will help that. I don't think she's any more unstable than any other shinobi. Jiraiya's face took on a somber frown as he watched the teens exit the restaurant. It's not Tayuya I'm worried about. Shaking her head, Anko changed the subject. So, find out anything new about Akatsuki? She asked, eyes unconsciously shifting to make sure no one was close enough to eavesdrop. Not much. However, what I did manage to discover was very important. The Akatsuki are beginning to move. The Jonin's eyebrows shot up into her forehead. Are you serious? You said we had 3 years, and it hasn't even been 2. The man sighed and leaned back in his seat, rubbing a tired hand over his face. Not for the first time since they'd begun the trip, Anko realized just how old he was. He looked like he hadn't slept in days if the light bags under his eyes were any indication, and the wrinkles around his mouth seemed more pronounced than ever. I know, but it's not as bad as it sounds. It seems as if they're just trying to locate them rather than actually catch them. I guess you could say that they're getting their ducks in a row. If things keep going at this pace, we should still have another good year or so to train them. Anko slowly nodded her head, chewing thoughtfully on her wooden dango stick. So, basically, we have to turn them into kick-ass shinobi able to defend themselves from a group of A and S rank noobnin within a year. Right. I can do that. She lifted her hand and motioned for the ditzy, large-chested waitress to bring her another beer. She was gonna need a lot more booze. Naruto and Tayuya walked side by side, either one speaking, or for that matter, even looking at each other. Both were content with simply being with each other, reunited after almost a year apart. Just as she was getting used to their comfortable silence, Naruto suddenly jammed his hand into his large jacket pocket, instantly grabbing her attention. Here, he said, shoving a small gift bag into her hands. She looked up at him curiously, only to find that he was looking away. Shrugging on the inside, she thrust her hand into the bag and pulled the item out. Shortly afterwards, she gasped. Tayuya stared at the black hat with a mixture of surprise and awe. It was practically identical to the one she'd torn during her battle with Shikamaru in both color, texture, and style, the only difference being that it was a little darker in saturation because it was brand new. It touched her that he remembered what it looked like since they'd been bitter enemies the last time she was wearing it, and even more so that he bothered to buy it for her. So she was understandably surprised when he suddenly grabbed it and the bag out of her hands. Sorry, Naruto said, stuffing the hat back into the bag. She stared at her empty hands for a few seconds before the realization of what he'd done fully hit her. What the hell are you doing? I didn't even get to try it on yet, she yelled, jumping on him in an attempt to grab back her gift. Unfortunately, now that he was a few inches taller than her, he could easily keep the bag out of her reach. The blonde raised his eyebrows a bit, confusion evident in his features. I thought you didn't like it. You just kept staring at it with this weird look on your face, so. Of course I do. I love it. I was just surprised. I've never really gotten gifts, she said, body flushing against his as she continued to reach. Oh. He handed her back the bag, smirking a little as she practically snatched it from him. Thanks, she mumbled after making sure that he wouldn't try to grab it again. I feel like you're always giving me shit, but I never give you anything back. I don't want anything back. I just saw it in Kumogakure and thought you'd like it, that's all. It's gonna get cold in a few months, and it wasn't like it was expensive or anything. Still, she stared down at the hat with a feeling of sadness and nostalgia. He didn't know what her old hat had meant to her, and the fact that he'd gotten her a new one. Tayuya wiped at her nose with the back of her sleeve, sniffling quietly in an attempt to hold back her tears. She couldn't bring herself to actually hug him, so she awkwardly leaned into his body, shoving him lightly with her shoulder. Naruto grinned down at her, instantly understanding what the small action meant. Surprising her yet again with his boldness, he looped an arm around her shoulders and squeezed, initiating the hug that she couldn't give. Against her wishes, she felt her face heat up as blood began to flow into her cheeks. It was a little frustrating how something so meaningless could make her blush, but fuck, the guy had just given her back a piece of her past. She'd never tell him, at least not for a while, but this small gesture had instantly made him the most important person in her life. Granted, he'd already held that position, and it wasn't that great of a feat since she had maybe 5 or 6 living people that she gave any sort of a shit about, but still. Thankfully, he let go after a couple of seconds, but not before she jabbed him in the side with a sharp elbow, causing him to laugh and rub his side. When she felt reasonably in control of her emotions, she risked looking up at him again, only to find that he was lost in thought. Staring at the faraway expression on his face, she couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking about. Something had happened to him. He wasn't the same Naruto that she knew. He was smarter, observant, more world-weary. She could see it in the way he chose his words before he spoke and the way he studied her face whenever she said something, probably scrutinizing her expressions for context clues. It was somewhat saddening to admit, but he was growing up. I know this is a stupid question, but we're still friends, right? Tayuya asked, voice coming out more unsure than she'd wanted it to. Huh. Of course we are, he exclaimed, putting off that she'd asked something so obvious. Still, Tayuya was unconvinced. I know we haven't talked in a year, but I want you to know that you can tell me anything. There's nothing you could say that would make me not want to be your friend. A small, wry smirk appeared on her face. Unless you said you hated me or something. Then I'd have to kick your ass. Naruto stared down at her, a little surprised that she was being so honest. He knew how hard it was for her to say something like this, so he shot her a wide smile to show his appreciation. Thanks, Tayuya-chan. You'll promise to tell me if something's bugging you? She asked again, grabbing his sleeve so that she could be certain she had his attention. She instantly let go when she realized what she'd done, shoving the offending hand into the waistband of her shorts just in case it got any more bright ideas. Luckily, Naruto barely seemed to notice. His smile fell into a more natural position, and he looked her straight in the eyes when he answered her. I promise. Chapter 28. Naruto took a deep breath, keeping his eyes closed as he focused on the feeling of the world around him. It was a weird phenomenon he'd only discovered in the last year after training with Yujito and Killer Bee, but somehow, if he concentrated as hard as he could vaguely sense the chakra of the people around him. Everyone had a different chakra signature, and more often than not, it directly correlated to their personality. Tayuya, strangely enough, was an exception. Her chakra signature was much more calm and gentle than he thought it'd be, though it did have the tendency to spike upwards every now and then. Perhaps he didn't know her as well as he thought he did. His mind gradually shifted back to his friends in Kumo, and more specifically, to the woman who taught him how to meditate in the first place. Naruto nervously stepped into the bedroom of Yujito-ni, idly wiping at the small beads of sweat that had appeared on his forehead. It was the first time he had been in the room of a member of the opposite sex, and the fact that she was a little over twice his age did nothing to stem his fear. Earlier that day his fellow had grabbed him by the collar and literally dragged him to the large apartment that she shared with another kunoichi. He'd barely gotten a glimpse of the rest of the apartment before she had opened the door to her room and motioned for him to enter. What he did see, however, was the highly amused smile of Yujito's roommate, whose name he had later learned was Samui, and the thin towel barely covering her ridiculously large chest. "Sit," Yujito commanded, closing the door behind her and pointing to her bed. Naruto's eyes widened. His perverted side had considered this possibility, but his common sense had pretty much assured him that nothing bad was going to happen. Why?" he asked, eyes darting around the room for an escape. Yujito had just come around to him being allowed to stay in Kumo, and as such, he didn't fully trust her yet. Rather than answer his question, she walked over until she was standing right in front of him, dark eyes staring down into his blue ones. "Sit," she said again, using her demon voice. He'd never admit it to her face, but when her voice suddenly dropped a few octaves and blue flames shot out of her eyes and mouth, it scared him shitless. It was one of two things that was capable of giving him nightmares, with the other being the thought of serving Orochimaru as his personal assistant. Being the obstinate brat that he was, though, Naruto took his sweet time situating himself on the bed. A ghost of a smile appeared on the older woman's face at his compliance, and she relaxed her face until all traces of the nearby were gone. "Cross your legs." When he did so, as slowly as possible, of course, she climbed onto the bed behind him, straddling his body with hers. Naruto's face instantly began to turn red, and the first signs of panic sprung up on his face. "What are you?" "Shhhh. Relax, I'm helping you," she purred, forcing him to lean back until his back was touching his chest. At first, it was tough. Yujito was no young woman, so her chest was rather developed. Eventually, though, he was able to calm down enough to fully relax against her body, eyes closing involuntarily as he was lulled into a dreamlike state by her heartbeat. "Doesn't that feel better?" she asked in little more than whisper. Naruto slowly nodded his head, feeling the tension in his body gradually begin to leave him. He didn't know how long they'd sat there, but it felt like hours. He felt her hands slip under his shirt and rest on his stomach, and while it freaked him out a bit, it wasn't enough to break him out of his trance. "Try channeling the Kyuubi's chakra," she whispered. "And keep your eyes closed." He was a little hesitant to use the demon's chakra after what had happened the last few times, but he was feeling so calm that he did as she instructed anyway. Yujito was much more experienced when it came to using her demon's chakra, and even if he did go out of control, she'd most likely be able to contain his power. Besides, it wasn't like he really had a choice. Squeezing his eyes tighter together, the genin focused on the seal surrounding his belly button until the familiar slow burning began to spread throughout his body. "Guess how many tails you're using right now?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. When he shrugged, she answered, 3. At that, Naruto's concentration was broken, and the cloak of bright red chakra that had been surrounding him began to evaporate. He turned to look at Yujito, eyes wide with surprise. "I was using 3 tails? But I can usually only fully control 1. See what happens when you meditate? Chakra is as much spiritual as it is physical. If you're able to exert full control over both parts, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that you could control up to 6 tails without losing your mind. Controlling all of them may require some help from the Kyuubi, though." The blonde's eyes widened even more, and he stared at the still dissipating red chakra with amazement. So this is what Jiraiya had been trying to teach him all those months ago. He thought it was stupid and boring at the time, but now. Interrupting his thoughts, Yujito continued to speak. "I was helping you contain the Kyuubi's chakra with my own demons, but if you concentrate on this feeling, you should be able to control it all by yourself. Like I said, ideally, you'd have some sort of dialogue with your tailed beast, but the Kyuubi probably isn't as understanding as mine or B's." Naruto frowned at this. No matter how hard he tried, he just couldn't imagine Kyuubi helping of his own free will. The few conversations he'd had with the beast had pretty much assured that. Still, 6 tails was a lot of power, and if he could control that much, he'd be the most popular shinobi in the village. Thanks, Yugi-chan. The woman's face, which had finally cracked a smile, dropped into a deep frown. Bright blue chakra began to seep from her eyes, and her nails grew into sharpened knives. What did I tell you about calling me Yugi-chan? She hissed. The boy instantly shot off the bed, making a beeline for the door. But I can't call you Ni-chan, so. Then Yujito-sensei or Yujito-sama will be fine. Sure thing, he started, opening the door. Yugi-chan. With that, he disappeared from her bedroom and ran out of her apartment, the older hot on his heels. A smirk appeared on his face as he thought of the older woman. By the time he'd left, she had all but accepted the nickname he'd given her. Sure, she had kicked the stuffing out of him a dozen times for it, but he knew she'd cave eventually. The shuffling of the sheets behind him caught his attention, forcing him out of his thoughts. Hey, Taiyuya mumbled sleepily, a small smile on her face. Her shorter red locks framed her face, making her look more like an innocent 16-year-old girl than the hardened shinobi that she was. It was odd. He didn't remember her looking this nice. He'd also noticed the day before that there was a strange bounce in her step when she walked, and even her eyes seemed to dance every time she looked in his direction. If he didn't know any better, he'd say that she was happy. The blonde took in her slim, rumpled form, unable to stop a grin of his own from stretching across his face. Although he was happy to see her again, he'd be lying if he said that things between them weren't a little awkward. 11 months was a long time to be away from someone, and since both of them had been going through radical changes during their time apart, it was almost like they were two totally different people. It was only the memories of each other, and the fun that they'd had that allowed them to be half as close as they were now. Morning. He closed the glass balcony door and sat down on the edge of the bed next to her, looking straight into her slightly unfocused eyes. It was easy to see that she was still tired, but that wasn't completely her fault. After getting back to the hotel, they'd ended up spending the entire night talking, and after 4 hours of nearly nonstop catching up, the two of them had finally dozed off together. At some point in the morning, Anko had come and gone, but it had barely even registered to his subconscious. So far he'd learned that she had 18 new, written 2 new songs, and acquired a badass new scythe that she'd liberated from a thug who had stupidly tried to rob her. Of course, when he'd asked about she'd simply shrugged cheekily and smirked at him, causing him to break out into a cold sweat. That look was never good. Noticing the odd smile that Naruto was currently sending in her direction, Taiyuya stared back at him, right eyebrow quivering in curiosity. What? She asked, the corners of her lips twitching upwards. I'm not used to you smiling all the time. Realizing exactly what she was doing, Taiyuya's face instantly dropped into a scowl. Don't get used to it, faggot. Unfortunately, she still couldn't hide the amused glint in her eyes. The blonde laughed and stood from the bed, glad to see that she was still the same Taiyuya. In retrospect, he really shouldn't have said anything. He'd forgotten how adverse she was to looking and acting like a girl, claiming other shinobi took her far less seriously when she did so. Which, to an extent, was true. If he had to fight Hinata or Ino, it'd be tough for him to feel even an ounce of fear. Hinata's techniques were devastating, but given her timid nature and the fact that he bested her supposedly more skilled older cousin, he'd be hard-pressed to go even half-speed against her. It was the same with Ino. She had the ability to mindfuck a person, but not only did they have to be standing pretty still, her body was a rag doll after she left her body whether she successfully completed the jutsu or not. Since he used shadow clones like they were going out of style, the chances of her hitting the right one with her technique was 1 in 100 at best. He was only mildly afraid of Sakura because he knew firsthand how strong she could get when she was angry, but even then he wasn't worried about being able to take her if it ever came down to it. The only kunoichi he would be honestly and truly afraid to fight were Anko and Yudi-chan, and that was because they had over 10 years of experience on him and wouldn't think twice about critically injuring him. Stretching a little, Naruto walked over to his pack. Where are you going? Taiyuya asked, sliding out of the bed to follow him. She was still wearing the same t-shirt and pair of spandex shorts from the day before, but she didn't really care. She didn't smell that bad, and hell, it might keep her from getting hit on by some random asshole who couldn't help but notice her bright red hair from across the room. She almost gagged at how many times she'd heard that one over the past year. Without looking at her, Naruto pulled off his shirt and reached for a clean one, not seeming to mind that she was still in the room. Since he was busy pulling on his shirt, he missed the brief, appraising glance that Taiya gave his bare torso. Downstairs to get breakfast since it's complimentary and all. Wanna come? She pretended to mull it over in her mind, although they both knew full well what her answer would be. Besides the fact that her stomach was eating her alive from the inside out, there wasn't anything else to do in the room. It would also give her a chance to spend some more time with Naruto, since as she'd learned the hard way, nothing was certain. Last time she'd been blindsided by his departure, and the worst part was that they were in the middle of a huge, meaningless fight. She regretted not spending all of their remaining time together before he'd left for Kumo, but there wasn't anything she could do about it now. All she could do was try to make sure that history didn't repeat itself and take full advantage of the fact that he was back. Yeah, I'll go with you, she sighed, making it seem as though she was doing him a huge favor. She slipped on her sandals, ran a brush through her hair a couple of times, and began to walk down to the dining hall of the hotel, leaving Naruto to catch up with her whenever he was finished getting ready. It only took a few seconds for him to appear next to her, fully dressed and ready to go. He stuck his elbow out towards her with a grin. Taiya stared at the offered appendage as if it were rotting meat. Was he really expecting her to do something as campy and lame as allow herself to be escorted to breakfast? In typical Naruto fashion, the blonde stuck out his lower lip in a pout. Despite herself, she smiled at his childish antics, and rolling her eyes, she looped her arm through his and walked side by side with him down the stairs. Good afternoon, welcome to the Yamanaka, oh Sakura. You're late, Ino frowned, stepping around the counter to greet her friend. Her long, blonde hair swished behind her as she moved, and grinning a bit, she closed the floral magazine she'd been reading. Tsunade-sama working you hard again? The medic Nin tiredly nodded her head, brushing her shoulder-length pink hair out of her eyes. Yeah, especially now that I'm an official nurse. I'm only allowed to treat small things like cleanly broken bones and stabbed wounds, but that's tiring in itself. Do you know how many patients I've had to see this morning? 13. Rolling her eyes, the blonde placed her hands on her friend's shoulders and pushed her towards the door of the shop. Hi, tell me about it while we walk. I only have 20 minutes for my break now thanks to you. She quickly changed the sign from open to closed on her way out, and with a relieved sigh, locked the shop up for lunch. So Ino started, stretching her arms towards the sky. Where are we eating today? That new restaurant that opened up down the street? I hear they make good salads. Sakura frowned lightly, pushing her shoulder-length pink hair out of her eyes. She really needed a haircut, and soon. Nah, I'm not in the mood for salad. Besides, it'd probably be too crowded anyway. She paused and glanced around the market district, looking for a suitable place to eat. She and Ino had been grabbing lunch together for the past year or so, using their breaks to catch up on the latest village gossip and news. Working in a hospital, Sakura had plenty of opportunities to eavesdrop on the various patients and visitors, and as such, she was always among the first to find out who was dating who was wooing who, and who was doing who. Likewise, being in the busiest part of the market district, it was easy for I to glean some information off of the many shoppers who frequented the area. Oftentimes, she didn't even have to use her ninja skills. An open window and a clear mind was usually all she needed. The blonde's eyes lit up as she laid eyes on a familiar sight. Hey Sakura, how about there? Sakura followed her friend's outstretched finger and lifted her eyebrows. Ichiraku's? She asked, a little surprised that the Diet Queen had suggested ramen. Ino lightly shrugged her shoulders. Why not? It's been a while since we've had ramen, and I hear their diet ramen is pretty damn good for what it is. Sakura rolled the idea around in her head. While she wasn't that big a fan of the dish, it did have somewhat of a nostalgic taste to it. That, and she was running low on money since she'd blown her last paycheck on weapons and a bunch of clothes. Nodding her agreement, the two girls stepped into the small roadside ramen stand. Welcome! A male voice boomed, turning away from the stove to greet his newest customers. There were already 3 other men in the restaurant, so the two girls slipped onto the 2 stools in the far corner of the restaurant. Ah, Sakura-san and Ino-san, is it? Long time no see. What do you two have? The girls blinked and exchanged surprised glances. They didn't come here that often, so they were both a little shocked that he remembered their names. As if sensing the question on their faces, Ayam stepped from behind the curtain separating them from the back room. Naruto-kun talks about you two all the time, and you know how often he drops by. The young woman's smile dropped a bit. Or, at least used to. How is Naruto-kun doing? Have you heard from him? The genin shook their heads and frowned. Not at all, Sakura answered. Tsunade-sama says that any and all communications with Naruto's group are S-rank secrets, so she won't tell me anything. The brown-haired girl's smile fell a little more. Ah, I see. I hope he's all right. As if suddenly remembering where she was, she perked back up and smiled once again towards the kunoichi. So, what will you have? Without even taking time to think, the girls replied simultaneously. Diet ramen. If it weren't for the fact that she witnessed this occurrence nearly every time a group of girls came in, Aya might have laughed. Instead, she turned to grab some clean bowls for her father to use. Tucci nodded his head and turned back towards the stove. Coming up. While they waited for their orders, the girls did everything in their power not to blurt out the question that was burning at the back of their minds. What had Naruto said about them? They were expecting the blonde to talk about Sakura all the time, but Ino? As far as they knew, the boy had never taken much of an interest in the Yamanaka past the level of friendship. Deciding to bite the bullet and ask, Ino leaned forward to get Ayam's attention. So, what exactly has Naruto said about me? The blonde asked, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. It apparently hadn't worked too well, as the waitress turned to look at her with a positively evil smirk. Oh, nothing big. I can't remember everything, but I do know he mentioned that you were pretty a couple of times, and that you're really good at making flower arrangements. Oh, and he kept bringing up how your eyes kind of matched the sky. Taiyuya-san didn't like that one too much. Sakura's eyebrows shot up into her overly large forehead. Naruto had said that about Ino? And in front of that wench from the sound, no less? Just what the hell was going on here? They couldn't have exchanged more than 10 words with each other since their time in the academy, so what made him have such a high opinion of her best friend? Next to her, Ino was equally shocked. Other than the comment about her flower arranging, all of this was news to her. Even though it had been a while since she'd considered the boy as a potential boyfriend, perhaps it was time to dust off that old idea about him becoming her knight in shining armor. He'd only get bigger, stronger, and wiser during his training trip, and maybe by the time he returned, he'd be perfect for her. Don't even think about it, Ino, Sakura warned, jade eyes narrowing at the faraway look on her rival's face. Ino snapped back to attention, shaking her head lightly to clear the daydreams. Think about what? About Naruto. I know you, and I can see that predatory look in your eyes. Just because he complimented you a few times doesn't mean that he's not the same Naruto you knew in the academy. Listen, he'll never change. You'd just be wasting your time. Oh, I don't know about that, I am cut in, leaning over the countertop with a mischievous smirk. He seems pretty determined to get stronger, and if anyone can change, it's Naruto-kun. In fact, once he hits 16, I may try to get a piece of him myself. Of course, she was joking. Naruto, if anything, was like her little brother. She'd watched him grow up before her eyes, and the thought of being his girlfriend was, well, a little gross. The loud clank of 2 bowls being placed on the countertop interrupted their mini-conversation, and with an angry grunt, Tucci pulled his daughter away from the kunoichi. You will do no such thing. I'm not ready to marry my daughter off to some hoodlum shinobi just yet, even if it is Naruto. The brunette rolled her eyes. Relax, Dad, I was just joking. He's a kid compared to me. The man grunted again and turned back towards the stove, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Once she was sure he wasn't listening, she leaned forward and placed her hand next to her mouth. Yeah, right, she whispered, shooting them a conspiratorial wink. Before her father could notice, she quickly hopped back and began to wash the dishes, humming, not so, innocently to herself. Sakura's brow furrowed. Okay, something was definitely going on. If she counted Hinata and the red-headed bitch he was currently training with, Naruto had 4 girls trying to make him theirs, one of whom was a whole 5 years older. Just when she thought Ayam preferred Kakashi too. She slowly ate her noodles, trying her best to understand what they saw in her idiot of a teammate. He was short, loud, annoying, stubborn, and to top it all off, he wasn't even that great of a ninja. As far as she could tell, the blonde had 0 redeeming qualities as a boyfriend. Sure, he was a good, loyal friend, but that was about it. Anything else would be pushing it. Sakura? You're not done yet? Ino asked, staring at the girl in curiosity. It's already been 15 minutes, and our breaks end in another 5. Hurry it up, will you? The medic Neen looked down into her bowl and sighed. She'd only managed to eat 10 or so bites of her food, and anyone who knew anything about ramen knew that once it got cold, it got nasty. The only one she knew who'd eat cold ramen was Naruto, and that was because he was a ramen freak. He could eat any kind of ramen any kind of way. Hell, she'd even see him dump a spoonful of sugar into his cup of ramen during their mission to the snow village. He thought it was salt, but still. Placing a few coins on the countertop, she slid off the stool and stretched, reluctant to return to the hospital for more training and patient treating. Thanks to Naruto, she hadn't been able to fully relax her mind and body. Even when he wasn't here, he was in her way. I guess we should split up here, Sakura said, already looking towards the Konoha General Hospital with a frown. Ino nodded her agreement, ponytail bobbing along behind her because of the action. Yeah, I won't have time to walk with you to the hospital today. Later, Sakura. The blonde waved, walking backwards as she spoke. She was eager to get back to the relative quiet of her flower shop so that she could once again rehash her plans about making Naruto hers. She wasn't all that interested in the blonde, but it never hurt to have a plan just in case. Who knows? He might actually come back as this badass, long-haired heartthrob who could rival even Sasuke in looks and talent. Even better, he might have matured and ditched the color orange. Ino snorted in mirth. Yeah, right. As if that could ever happen. Naruto scratched at his hair, frowning at how long it had gotten. The last time he'd had a haircut was well over 5 months ago, when he'd literally been dragged to a barber by Yujitoni, claiming that he was beginning to look like an upside-down mop. Noticing him mess with it, Tayuya reached up and ran her fingers through his messy blonde locks, painfully gripping a handful after a couple of seconds. You look like a fucking upside-down mop, she murmured, not noticing the way his eyebrows raised at her statement. Anko's pretty goddamn decent at cutting hair, you should ask her to do it for you. The blonde blanched at the thought of letting Anko within 20 feet of him with a sharp instrument. I'll think about it, he said, his tone implying that he'd already made his decision. There was no way in hell she was going to cut his hair, and he'd much sooner throw it back into a ponytail like Jiraiya's. Tayuya laughed and removed her hand from his head, fully understanding his reservations. If she hadn't been tied to a stump, she wouldn't have let Anko touch her hair, either. Well, you're getting a haircut at some point. You're starting to look like a queen. Listening to the genuine chatter behind them, Jiraiya gave Anko a sideways glance, a little put off by the angry redhead's overall calm demeanor. She still swore like a sailor with Tourette's, but the angry cloud that used to hang over her head was, at least for now, nowhere to be seen. What exactly did you do to her? It wasn't easy, believe me. Trying to mellow out a screwed-up girl like that is like trying to tame a vicious, man-eating tiger. You won't escape without a few scratches, and no matter how well-behaved they may seem on the surface, they're still dangerous. She glanced back at the genin and smirked, pleased by the mile-wide smile on Tayuya's face. Still, she hasn't been this happy in months. I'm glad the chibis are getting along even after all this time. Also glancing back at the teens, Jiraiya sighed. Emotions are messy, especially on a mission like this. When I suggested we bring Tayuya with us, I had no idea the two of them would get on so well. Anko frowned. Stop being so pessimistic. They haven't seen each other in almost a year, and they were like best friends. Of course they're going to be all giddy and talkative. Looking back to make sure the teenagers weren't paying attention, the lowered his voice and elaborated on his previous statement. Remember what I said before about them not getting too close? Yeah, what about it? That warning still stands. They're shinobi. Yes, they're humans with emotions, but they're also tools of the Fire Country. It's better that they try to maintain a certain professional distance between them while we're in such a tumultuous situation. Yeah, and just look how happy you are screwing hookers while living the life of a 50-year-old bachelor. Don't worry, I've got it under control. Before he could reply, a loud voice interrupted them. Hey, Ero-senin, where are we going, anyway? Tayuya asked, amusement heavy in her voice. Her eyes shone with mischief, obviously knowing how much he hated the nickname. It didn't help that Naruto was trying, and failing, to muffle a laugh next to her. Giving the Jounin one last warning glare, he schooled his face into a nonchalant grin and looked over his shoulder at the curious teens. Didn't we tell you? We're going to the Earth Country. At that moment, Tayuya stopped. Her eyes widened until they felt like they were going to pop out of her head, and her breathing became shallower by the second. She fell to her hands and knees and tried to catch her breath, but it was a futile effort. Oxygen was refusing to go into her lungs, and it wasn't long before she began to wheeze. Her entire body began to heat up, and eventually, she couldn't even see. Every muscle in her body shook as she tried to hold up her weight and keep from landing face first on the dusty ground below. Instantly, Naruto was at her side. He pulled her pack off of her back in an attempt to make her comfortable, but it seemed to do little to help her current state. Tayuya-chan? What's wrong? Anko-sensei. Ero-senin. Something's wrong with Tayuya-chan. The older shinobi rushed back to check on her, shoving the worried blonde out of the way. What's wrong with her? Naruto shouted, hovering over his sensei's shoulders. She's hyperventilating, Anko murmured, eyebrows also furrowing in concern. What? What's that? It's when a person breathes too rapidly and takes in too much air, usually caused by stress or anxiety, Jiraiya explained, fingers instinctively going to her neck to check her pulse. Judging by her body temperature, her blood pressure's also spiking. Tayuya, listen to me. Calm down. Take slow, even breaths. Her eyes were unfocused as she tried to follow his instructions, and her fingernails dug into the soft earth of the fire country. She began to suck in large gulps of air, opening her mouth as wide as she could. Drool slowly ran down her chin, pooling in between her clenched fingers. Finally, her breathing slowed and her cheeks gradually began to regain their pinkish color. Feeling a bit better, Tayuya shakily wiped her chin with the back of her hand and looked up at them with wide, fearful eyes. I can't go, she rasped, gripping Naruto's sleeve in her small, wet fingers. I can't. Go where? What are you talking about? Naruto asked gently, rubbing her back in an attempt to not be completely useless. He reached into his backpack and grabbed his water container, unscrewing it and handing it to her. When it became obvious that she wouldn't be able to drink, he carefully brought the canteen up to her mouth and titled it so that some of the cool liquid could seep into her mouth. It took her another few swallows of water, but the redhead was eventually able to calm down enough to continue. I can't go to Earth Country. I can't go back home. Chapter 29. So, Tayuya's from the Earth Country. Not that surprising given her features and affinity for Earth-style ninjutsu, Anko mumbled, arms crossed over chest as she leaned against the wall outside of her room. I'm actually surprised I didn't see it before. After Tayuya's meltdown, the group had decided to get a room in a nearby town. They'd spent the night to give her time to rest, and as far as they knew, the redhead had been asleep the entire time. Jiraiya nodded his head in agreement, letting loose a heavy sigh. Her heritage isn't the problem, though. I'm more concerned with why she doesn't want to go back there. I don't know about most people who've decided to join up with Orochimaru, but I ended up hanging out with the guy because my life was complete shit. I had no friends and a mother who was always out drinking and fucking random guys. She must have had some reason to completely abandon her life and follow a creepy, child-molesting stranger. For what seemed like the millionth time that day, the old man sighed. Regardless, we can't stay here forever. A decision has to be made. At that moment, Naruto emerged from the room. He shot them a tired grin as he closed the door behind him, obviously doing his best to appear happy and optimistic. Tayuya-chan's doing fine. She woke up a few minutes ago. Good timing, we need to speak with her. Before any of them could move to stop him, he walked into the room and stood at the foot of Tayuya's bed. Are you feeling any better? He asked. Yeah, I'm okay. The whole Earth Country thing just caught me off guard. Noticing the grim expression on the old man's face, she narrowed her eyes. Why? Jiraiya sucked in a large breath of air, knowing what the reactions of the two shinobi standing behind him would be after his next sentence. Right now you have two options. 1, you can put your fears aside and come with us to the Earth Country, or 2, you can stay in the Fire Country with Anko until we return. Ero-senin. Jiraiya. Naruto and Anko yelled simultaneously, both equally outraged by his statement. The man held up his hand, temporarily silencing their protests. I know you care about Naruto, and I know you care about his progress, so I'm sure you understand why this decision has to be made, he explained, staring straight into the girl's eyes. Naruto refused to give up. But Ero-senin. Naruto, Tayuya said, cutting him off before he could finish his sentence. He's right. I can't get in your way. Your enemies aren't gonna wait around for me to suck it up. The blonde opened his mouth to argue, but the piercing glare the redhead sent his way silenced him just as quickly. Defeated, the blonde let his shoulders drop. So what are you gonna do? What the fuck kind of question is that? I'm going with you. Yes. Naruto yelled, running over and enveloping her in a tight hug. Noticing the way her body instantly froze, he quickly let her go and grinned sheepishly. Sorry, but are you sure you're okay? Tayuya averted her gaze, causing his smile to drop into a frown. I'm fine, don't worry about it. She raised her eyes to look up at Jiraiya. When are we leaving for Earth Country? Tomorrow morning, preferably. With the training we'll be doing on the way, it'll take a good 2 weeks for us to get there. That'll give you some time to calm down and get your emotions in order. The girl nodded her head, lowering her eyes to her clasped hands. I'll be ready to go by then. If it was possible, Naruto's frown deepened. He hated the way her voice wavered as she spoke, and he hated how weak and subservient she was acting. Not for the first time, he wondered just what had happened in her life up until they met, and with the way things were going, it looked like he was close to finding out. Nodding and smiling at Tayuya in what he hoped was a comforting fashion, Jiraiya left the room, 2 sets of eyes glaring into his back. They knew he was right, but that didn't mean they had to like it. We should let her get some rest, Anko said a couple of seconds after they left, grabbing Naruto's arm. In a surprising show of defiance, the blonde ripped his arm out of the woman's grasp, shooting her his meanest glare. I'm staying with Tayuya-chan. His voice, normally light with a hint of humor, held a ferocity that neither of the kunoichi had ever heard from him before. For her part, Tayuya was floored. His reaction was not only unexpected, but completely unnecessary. Simply saying that he wanted to stay probably would have sufficed, knowing how hard Anko tried to push them together. I'm fine with it, Tayuya quickly interjected, noticing the way Anko's eyes narrowed. She didn't want Naruto to die so soon after they'd been reunited. Anko looked from Naruto to Tayuya and back again before frowning deeply at the blonde. Fine, but only because Taya-chan says it's okay. I'll be back in a few hours to check on you, the woman said, obviously more to Naruto than to Tayuya. As soon as the woman closed the door, Tayuya turned to her teammate. You shouldn't provoke Anko like that. She jokes around a lot, but I'm pretty sure she could kick your ass from here to Kumo. Naruto cracked a grin. That's not very far since we just left the border. Funny, she snorted, a small, forced smirk appearing on her face at his joke. Why didn't you tell me you were from the Earth Country? The girl shrugged uncomfortably, eyes flickering back to her clasped hands. She knew it was only a matter of time before he'd ask. Up until now, she'd shrugged off his questions about her past, using her superior wit and intelligence to distract him. Somehow, though, she didn't think that would work this time. It never came up. Well, why don't you want to go back? Did something happen there? Seeing that she had no intention of answering his questions, he continued. You're my best friend. When I killed Masumi, you were there for me. When I told you about Kyuubi, you didn't treat me like I was any different. You even laughed about it. You've always tried to help me any way you could, Tayuya-chan. It's my turn to help you. Naruto, if you're going to try to guilt-trip me into telling you, just get the fuck out. She could tell by the way his mouth set itself into a firm line that he wasn't pleased with her ultimatum, but the blonde wisely shut his mouth and sat down in the chair at the head of the bed, obviously doing his best not to pout. She almost smirked again at his antics, but she really wasn't in the mood to smile. She slipped under the covers to hide her face from his searching eyes. She was a little flattered that he was so concerned for her well-being, but the steely gaze he regarded her with was more than she could bear at the moment. We're still friends, right? He asked after a few minutes of silence. Tayuya fought back a groan. Don't pull this shit. Not now. Unfortunately, her warning did little to deter him. He continued to recite her words back to her, pissing her off more and more with each word that slipped past his lips. You can tell me anything. There's nothing you could say that would make me not want to be your friend. I'm just trying to help. Fed up, she sat up in the bed and pointed at the door. Get the fuck out. Tayuya-chan. Get out. she yelled, throwing her pillow at his head. She was miffed, but unsurprised, that he easily dodged it. At that moment, the door to the hotel room opened and Anko flew into the room. Before Naruto could stand to his feet, the woman had his arm behind his back and her forearm underneath his neck. You heard her, Chibi. It's time to go. The blonde struggled for a few seconds, but her grip was ironclad. Realizing he wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, except outside, he stopped trying to escape and allowed Anko to shove him towards the door. Tayuya watched them go with mixed emotions. She wanted to tell him, she really did. She knew that he of all people wouldn't judge her for her past. Hell, his early life was probably worse than hers, and she didn't exactly spend her formative years running through fields of daisies and buttercups. Grabbing the only remaining pillow, the redhead sighed loudly and slammed herself back onto the bed. This sucked. For the past 12 years she'd avoided thinking about her hometown. Now, however, it looked like she didn't have a choice but to confront the one thing she tried her damnedest to forget. It was going to be a long 2 weeks. Tayuya awoke with a start, eyes shooting open to stare at the ceiling. It wasn't unusual for her to wake up this way. It was probably due to some sort of nightmare, but by now, she'd managed to master the art of forgetting her dreams as soon as she opened her eyes. Feeling better? Naruto whispered, voice soft and even in the darkness of the room. She jumped slightly at the sound of his voice, a little annoyed that she hadn't been able to sense his presence immediately. Rather than admit to herself that he'd gotten better at hiding his presence, she decided to chalk it up to her current mental state. She slowly sat up in bed, rubbing the sleepiness out of her eyes. What time is it? She asked, blowing off his question. 6 in the morning. It took a few seconds for her eyes to adjust, but she eventually managed to pick his shadowed form out of the darkness. He was currently leaning back in the cushioned chair next to her. You didn't stay up all night watching me, did you? 'Cause that's just fucking creepy. A small grin appeared on Naruto's face. Not all night. Just most of it. She blinked at how easily he admitted it, unsure if he was pulling her leg or not. She'd be lying if she said she wasn't a little touched if he was telling the truth. Still, he couldn't know that. I don't need you to dote on me all the time. I can take care of myself. Naruto shrugged his shoulders. I know, but it makes me feel better to know that you're okay. The blonde paused, apparently just realizing that she'd never answered his question. Are you? Tayuya rolled her eyes. Yeah, I'm fine. I just freaked out a little because I wasn't expecting it, but it's not a big deal. Surprising them both, the blonde reached out and grabbed her hand. I'll be there with you when we cross the border. Don't worry, okay? Reflexively, she flinched. Her first reaction was to snatch her hand out of his grip, but remembering what Shizen had said over a year ago about Naruto being easily hurt by things like that, used all of her willpower to keep her hand still. As if he could sense her unease, Naruto tightened his grip on her until she relaxed. Thanks, Tayuya mumbled, an uncharacteristically shy smile appearing on her face. A sudden flash of light interrupted their brief moment, and both teenagers turned in surprise to see a mischievously grinning Anko holding up Tayuya's small, silver camera. Shizen's gonna love this one. Fuck, would you stop sneaking up on us? As if just realizing what they were doing, Tayuya ripped her hand out of his and shoved it into her lap. It took her a few seconds, but she eventually processed the woman's words. She looked at Anko with the evilest glare she could manage. Have you been sending these pictures to Konoha? The woman's grin widened. May babe. You fucking bye. They're serving breakfast now, Naruto interrupted, standing to his feet. You still like strawberry crepes, right? Let's go eat, it'll help you feel better. She fumed for a few more seconds, not yet willing to let go of her anger. However, the promise of strawberry crepes ultimately won her over. She hadn't eaten much since her freak out, and now that she was better, her stomach was punching her in the intestines in protest. Fine. Shooting Anko one last dirty glare, she tossed the covers aside and slid out of the bed. Unfortunately, she'd forgotten that she was only wearing a pair of panties. Luckily for him, Naruto had the presence of mind to turn his head away from her bare legs the instant he saw them. Swearing loudly, Tayuya threw the covers back over herself, face burning with unhidden embarrassment. Naruto quickly walked towards the door, knowing she wouldn't move until he was gone. I'll go down first. He called, already heading down the hallway. As soon as he closed the door behind him, Anko gave Tayuya a toothy grin. He definitely got a good look. The redhead reeled on her teacher, eyes blazing and teeth bared. What the hell is your problem? Why do you keep doing this shit? The woman shrugged. Because it's funny. Before the girl could say another word, Anko tilted her head towards the door. Shouldn't you be going downstairs? Naruchan's gonna wonder what happened to you. Realizing that nothing she did or said would have any effect, Tayuya slid off of the bed and angrily stormed over to her bag, ignoring the stiffness and groaning of her joints. She slipped on a pair of training shorts, ran a brush through her hair a few times, and licking her finger, she wiped the crust from around her eyes. Shooting Anko one last dirty look, she ripped open the door and slammed it behind her, reveling in the satisfyingly loud bang that the action caused. Naruto crouched down on the tree branch, eyes darting around the forest in an attempt to find any sign of life. Reasonably sure that the coast was clear, he hopped from the tree towards the ground, only to be pierced through the heart by a kunai. Shortly afterwards, he exploded in a puff of smoke. A dozen meters away, Tayuya cursed. Of course it was a Kagebunshin. It was always a fucking Kagebunshin. Now that Naruto had her position, she needed to move, and fast. She dropped to the dirt and sprinted deeper into the forest, trying as hard as she could to be quiet. However, her efforts were in vain. The blonde tackled her to the ground, driving her down hard into a pile of leaves. She managed to kick him off, only for him to explode in another puff of smoke. Not even a second later, two more Narutos jumped on top of her. She barely fended off their attacks, blocking the kicks with her shins and the punches with her forearms. Using the momentum from one of the clone's punches, she spun into a vicious roundhouse kick, dispelling it instantly. Now that it was one-on-one again, she felt much more comfortable taking him on. Sorry, Tayuya-chan. The clone, much to her surprise, exploded into a puff of smoke. She'd been certain that that was the real one. Would you stop with the shadow clones already? She yelled, stomping her foot in anger. She jammed her hand into her weapon's pouch and grabbed her flute, officially fed up with doing things the nice way. She put the instrument to her lips and began to play a slow, sleepy tune. She skillfully weaved her chakra into each note, activating the seals engraved in the flute to carry the sound further. Deeper in the forest, Naruto grinned. Was she really going to send her demons after him again? While they were really annoying to deal with, they were painfully slow. Even their creepy chakra-eating thing did little to affect him since he had so much extra to spare, so she usually didn't bother using them against him. Knowing her, she was probably only going to use them to push him into some trap or another. While waiting for her doki to appear, to his surprise he felt himself begin to grow weaker in the knees. His head suddenly felt too heavy for his neck, and if hadn't already been on the ground, he might have fallen and broken something. Utterly freaked out, he sprinted to where he believed Tayuya to be. Weirdly enough, the closer he got, the weaker he felt. Realizing that running was probably a bad idea in his current state, he slowed down and walked the last dozen or so meters to his teammate. What is that?" he asked, panting and struggling to stand. "It's a tune I've been working on. It's not quite working the way it should, though," she frowned, staring at the instrument with disappointment. "Maybe I should raise the pitch?" "Wait, so what is it supposed to do?" Tayuya grinned mysteriously, shoving her flute into her pouch. "You'll find out one day." He started to badger her for answers, but a loud, slow clap sounded from behind them. Both teens turned to see Jiraiya approaching with Anko in tow. "Not bad. Your taijutsu, ninjutsu, and genjutsu are all acceptable so far. As a result, from now until we leave the Earth Country, we're going to be training you to combat the Sharingan specifically." Naruto stiffened, instantly forgetting about Tayuya's jutsu. "Because of Sasuke?" Jiraiya nodded his head, recognizing the familiar determined glint in his eyes. "Yes, but more importantly, to fight Itachi. You'll need to be able to fend him off without looking into his eyes." At that moment, Anko pulled a scroll from her pack. Before she could say a word, Naruto piped up. "Is that the scroll Kakashi-sensei gave you when we left?" A little surprised that he remembered something so minor from so far back, Anko shrugged. "Yeah, it contains notes on how to fight the Sharingan. Some of these are based on the first Hokage's tips, and some of these are just untested ideas we've all managed to come up with. We'll be trying them out one by one until we find something that works." Am I going to have to learn this stuff too? Tayuya asked. Jiraiya rubbed his chin, tilting his head as he thought it over. It couldn't hurt. Since we're apparently training you to fight together as well as alone, there's a good chance you'll also have to face them. Naruto's face instantly hardened. I don't want Tayuya-chan to help me fight Itachi. The girl blinked. Excuse me? Tayuya asked, largely taken aback by his statement. Itachi and Sasuke team are my problem. You shouldn't have to fight my battles for me. Almost immediately after the words left his mouth, Naruto regretted them. The redhead's face was the definition of fury, and he was hard-pressed to remember a time when he'd ever seen her so angry. So it's okay if you risk your life killing Misumi to protect me, but it's not okay for me to do the same? What happened to all that shit you said before about both of us beating up Sasuke and Orochimaru together? That was before. It's different now, he mumbled. Unfortunately, she was far too angry to hear what he had to say. She was pissed, and taking a step closer to him, she raised her voice. What are you trying to say? Huh? That I'm too fucking weak to hold my own? That I'm gonna get in your way? Don't hold back on my account. Say what you want, I'm listening. She has a point. Taya-chan is just as good as you are, probably better. Not only that, but she's the best genjutsu user I've ever seen after Kurenai and the Uchiha clan. She could really help you in battle, Enko cut in an attempt to defuse the ticking time bomb otherwise known as Tayuya. All of the progress she'd made over the past year with stemming the redhead's temper was unraveling right before her eyes. Naruto was silent. He knew what Enko was saying was true. He knew having Tayuya along with him would double his chances of survival. Still, that did little to lessen his concern. But what if you get hurt? He mumbled, slowly beginning to realize that his argument was wearing thin. What if you get hurt? Tayuya instantly shot back. Helpless and out of ideas, Naruto turned to his teacher. Ero-sennin. I have to agree with the women on this one. You won't be able to take on Itachi alone, especially with your genjutsu at the level it is. If she's able to support you from afar, you'll stand a much better chance. Naruto narrowed his eyes, obviously displeased with the way the conversation had gone. He really had no good reason besides wanting to keep her safe, and since she was a shinobi, that wasn't a particularly strong argument. Danger was pretty much their job description, and death was an occupational hazard. Realizing this, he crossed his arms and pouted. It wasn't like there was anything else he could do. Enko rolled her eyes at his childishness. Even if he'd shot up by a few inches, he was still a brat. Anyway, we'll also be working on your genjutsu training more. Honestly, the only ones who can really help you with this are Taya-chan and Jiraiya. They'll mostly just work on ways to break them, though I'm not sure how much it'll help against the Sharingan. It can help, Tayuya cut in, seemingly calmer than she'd been only a few minutes prior now that it had been decided she'd be able to fight. Even if it's a powerful one, it's still a genjutsu. There are ways to break almost anything, and if we can strengthen his mind enough to recognize when a genjutsu has been cast, breaking it won't be impossible. Pain will be the most effective method given his healing factor and tolerance. We can also try to teach him how to temporarily stop his chakra flow, although I'm not sure if it's possible since he has so much of it. The only thing that may be impossible to defeat is Itachi's Manjikyu. I've heard Orochimaru bitch about how unfair that was since I joined him. Jiraiya nodded, a little surprised at the amount of knowledge she possessed for her age. Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, since you're already proficient with genjutsu, Enko and I were thinking of teaching you something completely different. Tayuya lifted her eyebrows. What else could there be? Other than improving upon her taijutsu, ninjutsu, and genjutsu, there was nothing. As if reading her mind, Enko answered her question. Along with continuing in your taijutsu and ninjutsu training, we're going to be working on your tactics. My tactics? Tayuya asked, more than a little confused by this. You're a brilliant girl who has a natural sense for battle and strategy, but that ability only seems to manifest itself in the middle of a fight. We want to work with you in using it before your back's against the wall, and it'll also help you and Naruto work better together as a team. You have a good head on your shoulders, Taya-chan, but if we're going to take on the Akatsuki, we need someone with an amazing one. For the first time since they'd left Konoha, Tayuya felt an indescribable amount of pressure. It was almost as if she was saying their victory depended on her. I can do that, she mumbled, more than a little trepidation in her voice. Sensing her fear, Anko grinned. Don't sound so nervous. Like I said, you're a bright girl, Taya-chan. It'll take you 2 or 3 months max to pick up on what we're trying to teach you. Now, if you were Naruto, you'd have a real reason to be afraid. Hey! Naruto yelled from his position on the opposite side of Tayuya. So that's what we're doing for the next 5 months. Any questions? Jiraiya asked. The teens glanced at each other, both still a little upset about their earlier disagreement. Still, now that things had been decided, there really wasn't much for them to argue about. I'll take that as a no. Let's pack up the campsite and head out. The group split up and began to clean, preparing for the next step in their journey. Listen up, chibis. The first, and most obvious thing you need to know is that you can't look into the Sharingan. Ever. Both teens rolled their eyes. After another week of walking and training, they were within 50 miles of the Earth Country. While Naruto had been concentrating on nothing but genjutsu during that time, Tayuya and Anko had been poring over scroll after scroll of accounts of famous battles and deducing what strategies the winning side had used and why. As expected, Naruto's progress had been slow. He was only able to break Jiraiya's weakest genjutsu 50% of the time, and that was using the pain method they were hoping to avoid. On the bright side, his pain tolerance was steadily increasing. Tayuya, however, was actually doing fairly well. She was now in the process of deconstructing the battles and coming up with her own, arguably more effective strategies. She still had a long way to go, but both she and Anko were confident that they had a handle on the basics. The rest was just about practical experience. No way, really? Tayuya groaned sarcastically in response to Anko's explanation. Frowning, Anko elaborated. I don't think you understand. If you look into his eyes, that's it. You remember what happened to Sasuke and Kakashi, right? Naruto slowly nodded his head, a grim frown appearing on his face. They'd both been put into a coma by Itachi's genjutsu, and it was only thanks to Tsunade that they were able to wake up. All it takes is a glance, Anko continued. With Itachi, things become even more complicated. He can trap you just by pointing his finger. So, from now on, you're only allowed to look at a person's feet. Tayuya raised her eyebrows. What do you mean? It's exactly how it sounds. From now until we get to the Earth Country, you can't make eye contact with anyone. Learn to read their expressions and mood based solely on how they move their legs and feet. Not only will it train you to not look into the Sharingan, but it'll help you learn to read people a little better in general. It's much easier to mask a facial expression than it is to mask the expression of an entire body. That's really stupid, the redhead said. Regardless of what you think, I hear it's how the first Hokage dealt with Uchiha Madara. Well, that in conjunction with using the reflections from the water at the Valley of the End. As I was saying, most people often move their feet before anything else. You'll learn to pick up on little nuances and be able to know what they're going to do before even they fully know. Now, it's going to be really hard at first, but after a couple of weeks, it should be like second nature to you. Alright, first training exercise, try to fight each other without making eye contact. Keep your eyes focused solely on each other's feet. That's it. Easy, Naruto said, turning to look at Tayuya. Unfortunately, his eyes instantly went to hers, only dropping to her feet after half a second. Anko frowned. You can't do that. Your eyes need to go straight to her feet. We'll expand upon this when we reach the Earth Country. We're supposed to be visiting a friend of Jiraiya's who's apparently some kind of taijutsu expert. Her interest piqued. Tayuya turned to look at Anko, just barely remembering to stare at her feet. Who? I'm not sure myself, but according to him, we might not even need to use this method. Anyway, practice amongst yourselves, she drawled, waving her hand in a shooing gesture as she walked away. What kind of taijutsu style could be more effective than this? Tayuya drawled sarcastically, making sure that the woman was still well within earshot. Who knows? Instead of thinking about that, Naruto threw a sudden kick at her midsection, smirking when it made contact. You should be concentrating on our fight. Tayuya grunted and held her stomach, wincing a little from the pain. A slow, angry grin appeared on her face, and after a couple of seconds she stood up and assumed a combat stance, staring down at Naruto's feet. This may be the stupidest idea that I've ever heard of, but you're still fucking dead. Her grin widening, she launched herself at him with full force, fully intending to make good on her threat. Chapter 30. Naruto watched her walk with furrowed brows, unable to ignore the tension in her body that seemed to grow tighter and tighter with each step she took. At this train of thought, the blonde blinked in surprise. After only a few days of training, he was actually starting to get the hang of only concentrating on a person's feet. He was doubly surprised that he could judge her mood based solely on the way her feet were moving. Tayuya-chan, Naruto mumbled, keeping his voice low to avoid catching the attention of their teachers. He noticed a small jump in her step before she spoke, leading him to believe that she'd been lost in her thoughts. What? Are you okay? Tayuya sighed with annoyance. If you're talking about my freak out, I told you, I'm fine. Really? He asked, eyes studying her feet in an effort to judge her honesty. It was becoming really annoying not being able to look at her face. If I need your help, I'll let you know. Tayuya almost groaned when she heard that familiar short intake of breath, signaling that he was about to say something else. Luckily, Anko chose that exact moment to interrupt them, saving the redhead from Naruto's probing questions. From this point on, no speaking. We're going into stealth mode until we pass the border, she called from her place up front with Jiraiya. Her voice had the usual, teasing tone Tayuya had become accustomed to over the last year and a half, but there was an unmistakable seriousness in her overall demeanor. They were about to sneak into enemy territory, and if they were caught, things could get very ugly very quickly. At worst, that would mean another war between IWA and Konoha, and at best they'd have to fight and brainwash the patrol. For her part, Tayuya was relieved. She could sense Naruto's worry, and it was only a matter of time before he would have begun to annoy her with his questions, and she really didn't want to have to kick his ass so soon after reuniting. Besides, the silence would give her time to think. Although she was still wary of being in the Earth country again, the closer they got to the border, the less afraid she became. After 2 weeks of ridiculously tough training, more so mental than physical, she'd been able to come to terms with returning home. The thing that concerned her most was what she would do once she got there. It had been almost 12 years since she'd left her old village to join Orochimaru, and she doubted that anyone would remember her. Not that she was complaining. There was really only one person she was even remotely interested in seeing, and there was no guarantee that they were even still alive. In a weird, somewhat morose way, she actually hoped that they were dead. It'd give her one less thing in life to worry about. A tentative hand slipped into hers, breaking her out of her thoughts. Reflexively, she glanced up to see Naruto's gloved hand tightly gripping hers. Her first instinct, like usual, was to rip her hand out of his and move away. However, she surprisingly found herself calming down. Since she couldn't talk, she squeezed his hand to show her thanks. It was odd. For some reason, she wasn't so adverse to him touching her. If anyone else had tried to hold her hand, she'd kick the shit out of them, but Naruto was different. Whenever he was close to her, she felt calmer, more comfortable. On one hand, this train of thought scared her. Relying on someone else for comfort went against everything she'd been taught since she was a child, and the more attached she became to someone, the more power she was giving that person to completely fuck her over, just like Misumi had done all those years ago. On the other hand, she somewhat welcomed it. Naruto would never intentionally hurt her, that much she was sure of. He didn't want anything from her except for her. He didn't want her talent, her body, at least she didn't think he wanted her body, or even her approval. She couldn't say that about any other person she'd ever met in her entire life. A finger snap from Anko grabbed her attention, and she looked up at the woman's feet to see that she was making a sudden turn off of the path. Since her hand was already in his, she pulled Naruto along with her, just in case he'd missed the signal. They walked for another 10 to 15 minutes in complete silence, each of them on pins and needles as they navigated the steadily thinning forest that led to the Earth country. Tayuya realized they'd made it across the border when the stiffness in the way Anko had been walking slightly dissipated. We're across the border. As promised, you can stop staring at each other's feet now. We're in enemy territory, so we can't afford to have you miss anything because you were staring at the ground. Tayuya, relieved by this, instantly looked up at Naruto. Her heart jumped into her throat when she saw that he was staring back at her, an equally surprised expression etched into his own face. He smiled brightly at her, looking, to her anyway, a little sheepish. Despite the situation, she found that she couldn't turn away. She hadn't seen his face in almost a week, the last time being when she'd woken up early to find his sleeping face only a foot away from hers. Although she tried to fight it, she couldn't stop the small smirk that popped onto her face. She'd forgotten exactly how infectious his smile could be. We'll travel inwards for another 3 miles or so until we reach my regular campsite. It's a small cave I burrowed into a rock during the war, and unless you scream as loud as you can, it's relatively soundproof thanks to a few seals and its proximity to a running river. It's well hidden from view by the large cluster of hills surrounding it, so we should be safe inside of it for a couple of days, Jiraiya explained, eyes darting around every few seconds. It was strange to see the man so on edge, but considering that they were in enemy territory with very little cover, it was understandable. For the most part the land was flat and rocky, broken up only by the occasional large rocky hill or mountain. Unlike in the Fire Country, if a border patrol squad came around, there was almost nowhere to hide. Their only real option would be to stay, fight, and hopefully brainwash the squad to keep them quiet. Which would be horribly inconvenient since something like that took both a lot of time and effort to do. We'll be making a full sprint to the campsite from here in around 5 minutes after the next patrol comes by. Then, we'll have another 10 minutes to get into the cave. Since this is a time-sensitive operation, I'm giving you 2 permission to remove your weights, Jiraiya said. At that, the teens exchanged wide, excited smiles. They were pretty much never allowed to take them off unless they were bathing or sleeping, and both were equally excited to see exactly how fast they had become. Wasting no time, they dropped the weights to the ground next to the scroll Jiraiya had laid out for them. The plan was for them to temporarily seal their weights until they reached the campsite, where they then unseal and re-equip the combined 500+ pounds of weight. As soon as they finished, Jiraiya quickly rolled and tied up the scroll, placing it in his knapsack. Someone's coming. Get down, he whispered, ducking down further into the small cluster of rocks they were currently hiding in. Seconds later, a group of 4 young rock ninja appeared barely 100 feet from where they were. They hastily looked around for a few seconds, obviously bored with their job, before lazily jogging off to presumably check the next area. They waited for another minute to make sure that the rocknin were indeed gone before standing up again. We're going. When I say go, I want you to sprint as fast as you can in that direction until you see me waiting for you, Jiraiya said, pointing straight ahead. Taiyuya lifted an eyebrow. Are you waiting for us? Have you finally gone senile? A smug grin appeared on the old man's face. Like I said, you'll see me waiting for you. The redhead rolled her eyes. She'd seen the old man move, and there was no way he was faster than her. She was 35 years younger and probably over 100 pounds lighter. The gods of speed definitely favored her. Jiraiya held up his hand to silence them, listening to make sure that no other rocknin were coming. On my mark, go! As soon as the words left his mouth, he was gone. The only proof that he'd even been there was a small dust cloud. Holy fuck, Taiyuya breathed, shocked at how fast he had disappeared. So much for her earlier theory. He may have been 100 years old, but he sure could move. Taiyuya-chan! Let's go! Naruto called from 20 feet in front of her, having taken off only a second earlier. Her heart pounding, she took off after him, running as fast as her legs would carry her. At first, she almost landed flat on her face because she wasn't expecting herself to be that fast. She was so used to carrying around so much more weight that her entire center of gravity was off. She soon got used to her speed though, and smiling widely, she lifted her head and sped up even more. God, it felt good to run. The wind blew her hair straight back, and her eyes were beginning to dry out faster than her tear ducts could lubricate them. She soon caught up to Naruto, who looked equally elated to be using all of his speed. This is awesome! He shouted over the windstorm they were creating, body little more than a blur even to her trained eyes. You're telling me! Despite saying that, Taiyuya felt her legs begin to weaken, and her breath was becoming shallower and shallower with each step. She was pushing herself to the ultimate limit, and while it felt great to go so fast, it was also extremely tiring. Luckily, she saw Anko skid to a stop ahead of them, and gradually slowing her speed, she did the same. She was a little pleased that she'd beaten Naruto by a full 5 feet, officially making her the fastest out of the 2 of them. After coming to a complete stop, she instantly fell to her hands and knees, gasping for breath on the soft, wet grass beneath her. Realizing how odd it was that there'd be wet grass in such a dry part of the Earth country, she grabbed a handful of the green plants and held it up to get a better look. Why is there grass here? We're next to a river, Jiraiya explained as he began to flash through a long set of hand seals. There are dozens of patches of forestry spread throughout the country if you know where to look, and I was lucky enough to find one on my first trip here. This place probably saved my life during the war. Finishing the sequence, he knelt down and pressed his fingertips into the ground. Barely a second later, one of the huge rocks behind them slowly sunk into the dirt, revealing a large, open-mouthed cave. Badass, Tayuya whistled, standing to her feet after catching her breath. She couldn't see inside the cave, but by snapping her fingers and listening to the echo, she could tell that it went deceptively deep. To open it, simply use the rabbit, hare, and ox symbols and press your fingers into the ground. There's another one on the inside of the cave that accepts the same seals. Let's get inside and start camp before nightfall, Jiraiya said, grabbing his pack and walking into the dark crevice. They spent the better part of an hour making a large fire towards the back of the cave and another hour gathering water and setting up their temporary campsite. It was just past dusk when they were finally able to sit down to enjoy a bunch of goodies Naruto and Tayuya had swiped from the hotel earlier by secretly sealing plate after plate of food into a small scroll. Since the breakfast buffet was only complimentary and didn't have anything fancy, the teens had only grabbed rolls, fruit, and pastries. It had been child's play for Naruto to slip food under the table for Tayuya to seal, and the look on the hotel staff's face when they saw how empty the buffet was sent both of them into gales of laughter. Surprisingly, it had been Naruto's idea, and all three of his fellow travelers wondered why they hadn't thought of it sooner. With full bellies and eyes heavy with fatigue, the four shinobi turned in for the night. Tayuya slowly opened her eyes, a wide, tired yawn escaping her mouth. She wanted nothing more than to go back to sleep for another 10 or so hours, but unfortunately, she had something much more important to do. Making sure that they were all asleep, Tayuya slipped out of her sleeping bag, already fully dressed and ready to go. She grabbed the small emergency knapsack that she'd secretly packed the night before. The only things she bothered to bring with her were some leftover fruit, pastries, a container of water, and her weapons pouch that contained some other essential items. She tiptoed to the entrance of the cave, using the seals Jiraiya had told her to use to open it. She only had a window of about 20 minutes to make it to the next town or else the border patrol would find and capture her. According to Jiraiya's reports, the security got a little heavier at night, which was to be expected since no one would be dumb enough to try to sneak into enemy territory during the day. She waited for the cave to shut behind her before slowly and carefully looking around. She didn't know exactly what time it was, so she'd have to wait for the border patrol to come by before she could leave. Luckily, she saw 4 dark shadows run by, and catching the glint of light from their headbands, recognized them as Iwanin. Playing it safe, she crouched down for another couple of minutes before running out of her hiding place. Even though it was a little cooler than she'd expected, it was still a pretty nice night. The moon gave her just enough light to maneuver around in while hiding herself at the same time, and besides the sound of her feet as she ran along the ground, it was completely silent. She'd barely gone a mile when a large hand grabbed her wrist, nearly scaring the ever-living shit out of her. Tayuya-chan, what the hell are you doing? Naruto furiously whispered, anger and betrayal heavy in his voice. The redhead felt her chest ache at his tone. She was glad that it was just dark enough to avoid clearly seeing his face. I'm sorry, but I have to go back home. Who knows when I'll get another chance. You can try to take me back, but I'm not going without a fight. Surprisingly, a relieved smile appeared on his face, and adjusting his own travel pack, Tayuya idly wondered when he'd had time to pack one. He straightened his back and continued in the direction she was going. Oh, is that it? Why didn't you say so? I'll come with you. She started to protest, but after thinking about it, decided that having him with her wouldn't be such a bad thing. On the off chance that they ran into one of the patrols, he'd be a big help, and hell, just having him around would make the trip easier in general. Shrugging, she followed after him. They jogged side by side through the dense forest of rocks at a relatively quick pace, keeping as quiet as they could. They were forced to stop every half hour or so to hide from the patrols and consult their map, but for the most part, it was easy going. After what seemed like dozens of hours, Tayuya held up her hand in a silent signal for him to stop. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, and wincing painfully, she realized that they were totally fucked. Jiraiya and Anko would have their asses for this, as she'd massively underestimated how long it would take to get here, never mind the trip back. We'll be there in a few minutes, Tayuya whispered, pointing towards a small speck in the distance. She looked over at him and narrowed her eyes. I'm warning you, Don't say anything unless I give you my approval. Got it? The blonde nodded his head, eyebrows furrowing slightly. He was still concerned, but even more than that, he was excited. He'd finally be able to understand Tayuya much better than he had before. The redhead was extremely tight-lipped about her past. Anytime he asked questions about her family or heritage, she'd either change the subject, shrug, or if she was in a particularly bad mood, tell him to shut the fuck up. So far, he only knew that she was from the Earth Country and had been with Orochimaru for at least 10 years, which was pathetic. They jogged the final mile to the village, and the closer they got, the more Naruto's face fell. The village was a dump, and that was putting it nicely. Most, if not all, of the houses looked like they were on their last legs, and the few people milling about in the sunrise looked like they hadn't had a decent meal in years. A few of them stared at Tayuya, but after a couple of seconds shook their heads and went on about their business, much to the redhead's relief. Luckily, red hair was much more common in the Earth Country than anywhere else, and after thinking about it, she realized they might have been staring because she was a stranger. There was no way any of them would be able to recognize her after 12 years, hopefully, anyway. They walked through the town at a slow, leisurely pace, both of them curious about the place she had spent the beginning of her life in. For her part, Tayuya didn't remember much. The only thing that really seemed familiar was the overall depressing atmosphere, and looking at the grim expression on Naruto's face, he'd apparently noticed it too. Hell, it was impossible not to notice. Finally, they reached a small house at the edge of the village. At that moment, a wave of nostalgia and memories hit her full on in the face, forcing her to take a hesitant step back. Everything was exactly as she remembered it minus the expected wear and tear. The chairs and pots that had been there when she left still sat broken and unused in their same spots, and the turtle pond, while most likely completely devoid of life by now, held the same exact floating ornaments as before. Hell, even the dead grass beneath her sandals had the same depressing crunching sound every time she took a step. "Are you okay?" Naruto asked, placing a comforting hand on her back. Tayuya slowly nodded her head, schooling her face into a mask of indifference. "I'm fine, just got a little caught off guard." She led him up to the front door and slowly placed her hand on the handle. As if suddenly realizing something, she snapped her head around to scowl at him. "Remember what I said about not saying anything?" When he nodded his understanding, she glared at him one more time before pushing open the flimsy wooden door. Just as she'd expected, the place hadn't changed at all. It was dingier, and it looked like it could use a good cleaning, but like the outside it was exactly as she remembered it. The same trinkets sat dusty and old on the same shelves, and the same pictures hung crookedly on the same yellowed walls. She paused for a minute to stare at them, racking her brain in an attempt to remember who the people in the photos were. She knew some of them were of her mother since the woman in the pictures looked pretty identical to herself, and she guessed that the man in the pictures was her father, but that was as much as she could deduce in such a short amount of time. She shook her head and looked away, remembering that they were in a bit of a time crunch. Granted, they were screwed no matter what time they got back, but she wasn't all that interested in sticking around. "Grandma," Tayuya called softly, cautiously walking further into the house. "Grammar, it's me. Tayuya. Are you here?" A weak, faint gasp reached their ears, and unable to hold herself back, the redhead quickened her pace to the back of the house. She rounded the corner and almost slid to a stop on the dusty wooden floors, her eyes widening at what she saw. "Tayuya," the old woman gasped, eyes equally wide and surprised. Naruto, not expecting her to suddenly dash off into the house, followed as fast as he could. He too rounded the corner, and just like Tayuya, his eyes widened when he saw the old woman lying on the brown, beaten-up old couch. To be frank, her grandmother looked like death. Besides being sickly thin, the woman's eyes were sunken into her head, surrounded by dark, prominent rings. Her weathered, leathery skin seemed to hang from her bones for dear life, and her thin, white hair was pulled back into a loose, scraggly bun. A few of her teeth were missing, and the ones that were left were grayed with age. None of that seemed to register with Tayuya, though. "I'm home," Tayuya smiled as she kneeled next to the woman and grabbed one of her tiny hands, shocking Naruto with her gentleness. He'd never seen this side of her before. Children, flowers, small animals, she treated everything as if she hated it. He swore he even saw her kick the cane out from under an old man while they were still in Konoha, but to be fair, the guy might have mumbled something insulting towards them under his breath and likely deserved it. To both of their surprise, the old woman quickly pulled her hand from Tayuya's and weakly slapped the girl across the face. Immediately afterwards, she fell into a coughing fit, her frail body shaking and shivering. "I thought I told you to never show your face here again," the old woman snapped after recovering, sounding a lot like Tayuya in her ferocity. Tayuya felt the backs of her eyeballs begin to burn. That definitely hadn't been the reaction she was expecting. She blinked back her tears and stood up, a fierce glare suddenly appearing on her face. "Fuck you! I come back after 12 years to see you and this is how you treat me?" she yelled, fists clenched and shaking with rage. "Nobody asked for your fucking pity," Tayuya's grandmother seethed. The girl laughed bitterly. "Pity? You don't fucking deserve it. What kind of bitch kicks a 4-year-old out and makes her fend for herself? I just came back to rub my success in your face." The woman scoffed, eyes rolling in disbelief. "Success? What success? You still look like a fucking drowned street rat in your father's filthy hat. I can't believe you still wear that nasty piece of shit." Naruto raised his eyebrows at her language. Well, that solved the mystery of where Tayuya got her notoriously dirty mouth from. Dropping her pack, Tayuya rummaged around in her bag for a few seconds before pulling out her headband. Jiraiya had given them strict orders not to reveal their nationality to anyone, but it's not like anyone would believe a dying old woman. "Look! I'm a ninja of Konoha now. In fact, I'm on a training trip right now with one of the legendary." Pleased by the shocked look that appeared on the old woman's face, she lifted her chin into the air, confident that she was finally gaining the upper hand. "That's right, you senile old bitch. I'm doing more with my life than you ever did." "Is that all? You became a ninja of that shitty village and you expect me to be pleased?" Tayuya suddenly turned around to look at Naruto. She seemed to be considering something for a few seconds, and apparently making a decision, grabbed the blonde's arm and pulled him further into the room. "Yeah, well, know what else? This is my boyfriend. He's also being trained by one of the legendary, and he's in good with the Hokage. And guess who else is training him? The famous Kopinin Kakashi." When her great-grandmother's mouth dropped open, the redhead's grin widened. "That's right, that's Kakashi. The student of the 4th Hokage. You remember that faggot too, don't you?" "Tayuya-chan," Naruto mumbled, a little worried about the girl's mental state. Not only was she giving away some pretty top-secret information to a resident of an enemy country, but her grip on his arm had been tightening more and more with each passing second. It was really starting to hurt. As if getting a hold of herself, the woman's face fell back into disapproval. "You? A boyfriend? Either he's fucking blind and dumb, or you're lying out of your ass." "Yeah?" Before he could react, Tayuya reached up and grabbed the back of his neck in her hand. She hesitated for a second, but with a strong pull, she lowered his head to hers and placed an unexpectedly gentle kiss directly on his lips. Naruto's eyes shot wide open. For a long, awkward 5 seconds, their lips combined in mutual shock. What surprised him the most was that he was the one to pull his head away, and even more surprisingly, she moved her head to follow before apparently realizing what she was doing and releasing the kiss. In his opinion, it lasted just a second too long for an act. They stared at each other with unreadable expressions, both trying their best not to freak out. Tayuya quickly turned to look at her grandmother, trying her best to appear as though the kiss was nothing new. "See?" she said, voice coming out much weaker than she'd wanted it to. In theory, the kiss was supposed to be no big deal. Until now, she'd never been able to see why people were so interested in slamming their lips against someone else's. It was just skin touching skin, at least, that's what she thought before. Now, she kind of understood its power. She didn't know what it was, but there was something electrifying about kissing Naruto. It actually felt good. Unfortunately, the woman's face remained unchanged. Am I supposed to be impressed by that? The redhead's shoulders noticeably slumped. "There's just no pleasing you, is there?" The old woman didn't answer, causing Tayuya's face to darken. "You know what? Fuck you. Fuck you, fuck this town, and fuck this stupid country. Come on, Naruto, let's get out of here." Without waiting for him to follow, she nearly ran out of the house. Even though she tried to hide her face as she left, Naruto still noticed the tears rolling down her cheeks. The blonde turned around to glare at the woman lying on the bed. He was pissed. He'd never seen Tayuya cry. Hell, he'd barely seen her sniffle, and now that he had, he hated how it made his chest tighten and his own eyes burn. He took a few seconds to calm himself down before speaking, lest he say or do something he would regret. I know you won't believe me, but Tayuya-chan's amazing. She's smart, strong, pretty, and has the biggest heart of anyone I know. She didn't deserve the things you said to her. Naruto bowed slightly. Even if she was a total bitch, she was still Tayuya's family. But before he could turn to walk away, the old woman reached out her hand. Wait, she croaked, stopping the blonde in his tracks. Come here. A little confused and unsure as to her motives, he cautiously stepped towards the old woman. You're not her boyfriend, are you? When the blonde averted his gaze, she cracked a smile. I knew it. That was the most awkward fucking kiss I've ever seen in my life. Just when he was about to deny her claim, the woman continued. Take care of that girl. She's bullheaded, harsh, and sarcastic, but she's my only grandchild. Naruto's face morphed from anger into confusion. Something wasn't adding up. Then why did you kick her out? Why are you telling me this? Have you seen this place? She exclaimed, arms weakly gesturing towards the house. It's a fucking dump. I couldn't let her grow up in this environment. With her temper, she'd have been dead or worse before she hit the age of 10, and my health was fading too fast for me to keep a decent eye on her. I thought she'd have a better chance anywhere else, and it looks like I was right. So why didn't you just tell her? He asked, feeling his previous anger towards the woman grudgingly begin to dissipate. If I told her, she wouldn't want to leave. You should know how she is. She acts like she's a badass, but she's a fucking marshmallow on the inside. She'd insist on taking care of me until I died, and I don't want that for her. Not if she's really working to make a better life for herself. Naruto slowly nodded his head. She was right. Tayuya was the kind of person who was loyal to a fault, as witnessed by the many times he'd been hospitalized. They hadn't even been that close back then, and she was by his bedside, waiting for him to wake up. If it was her grandmother, she'd try to abandon the training trip altogether and end up being forcibly sent back to Konoha for disobeying orders. She was smart, but not always rational. Tell me, is it true what she said about you? About the copy ninja? Naruto sheepishly rubbed the back of his head, a little embarrassed by how much Tayuya had bragged about him. She makes it sound more impressive than it is, but yeah. An amused, crooked grin appeared on her face. Then I can't let you beat her just because you have a few powerhouses training you. See that? Open it, the woman said, pointing at something behind him. Naruto followed her shaky, old finger to see a flat, wooden chest currently serving as a table. He moved the trash from on top of it and slowly opened the box. Inside were two large old scrolls, both just beginning to fray and yellow with age. He pulled them out and walked back over to the old woman. What are these? Those are the Kinjo family's techniques and history. I only had the chance to teach her the basics of using a flute for defense, but by now, if she's kept up with her practice, anyway, she can learn the rest on her own. Oh, and give her this. She reached to the table near her head and grabbed a picture frame. She used to stare at this picture for hours. Naruto raised his eyebrows. So Tayuya's family name was Kinjo. He then glanced at the picture and smiled. The photo contained two adults and a child, and judging by the woman's bright red hair and the man's angular eyes, they were Tayuya's parents. Tayuya didn't look to be any more than 1 or 2 in the picture, but it was obvious based on the mile-wide smile on her face that she was happy. As soon as you leave the Earth Country, give those to her. I don't have much time left, so I want her to have them. Hell, they're her birthright, as she and I are the last living members of this family. And whatever you do, don't let her come back. I know this is selfish of me, and she might hate you for a while after she finds out, but stand your ground. She'll respect you that much more. Nodding his head, he quickly sealed the scrolls and placed them in his knapsack. Just as he was about to say his goodbyes and walk away, the old woman's voice stopped him in his tracks. Oh, by the way, you should really look into becoming her real boyfriend. I can tell that she loves you, the woman smirked, a knowing twinkle in her tired eyes. Naruto's heart skipped a beat, and he could feel his entire body heating up with what he recognized as a blush. What? No way. We're just friends. Don't let her actions fool you, you're important to her. I know that girl, and if you actually tried, you could catch her. Think of it as a dying old woman's last wish. Make that stubborn little bitch happy. Her parents and I never wanted her to become a kunoichi, But since it's too late to change that, at least let her pop out a few kids and continue her bloodline. Apparently noticing the disbelief on his face, she continued. If you're still unsure, I'll let you in on a little secret. Members of the Kinjo family are voracious lovers. It'll be the best fuck of your life. A common weak spot amongst us is the small area just below the ear. Suck on that, and she'll do whatever the hell you want. Predictably, Naruto's face turned the color of a tomato. Bowing one last time, he quickly jogged out of the house lest she decide to give him any more tips. The first thing he saw when he exited the house was his partner, arms crossed over her chest, and eyes glaring daggers into his. What the fuck took you so long? Tayuya nearly yelled, eyes wild and blazing. A little taken aback by her reaction, Naruto blinked. His eyes dropping to the patch of skin below her right ear, he felt his face once again heat up with embarrassment. And nothing. I was just grabbing some stuff. Her face softened, morphing into a mix between anger and curiosity. Like what? He pulled the picture of a young Tayuya, flanked by her parents, from his knapsack, glad that he hadn't sealed it. Your grandma told me to take this, so I did, he said, handing it to her. Tayuya stared at the picture with an unreadable expression. Her fingers slowly traced the contours of her parents' faces, fluttering over the dusty surface of the glass as if she were afraid the frame would break if she touched it. She then placed the picture in her pack and slipped the bag onto her back without another word. Let's just go, she mumbled tiredly, heading towards the entrance of the village. They jogged out of the village at a slow, careful pace, neither one of them all that eager to get back to camp. Since it would be mid-afternoon by the time they got back, there was no doubt that Enko and Jiraiya would be awake and waiting for them with a hefty punishment. On the way back, Naruto's mind constantly wandered to the redhead next to him. Not only was he wondering what she was thinking about, but her grandmother's words kept repeating over and over in his head. The thought of Tayuya loving him was a little too hard for him to swallow. Sure, she probably loved him as a friend or brother, but as anything more? Not to say that she was too cold for that kind of love, but at this current stage in her life, she didn't seem all that interested in it. Still, what if it was true? What if she really did want him to be more than a friend? Naruto sighed inwardly, feeling the beginnings of a headache in his left temple. If he started thinking about that, he'd also have to begin evaluating his own feelings for her. He loved her, no doubt about it. She was easily one of the most important people that had ever been in his life. He remembered the aching feeling he'd felt in his chest when he'd seen Masashi kiss her all those months ago. It was the same feeling he'd get whenever Sakura fawned over Sasuke before he left the village. Did that mean he liked her? That he saw her as more than a friend? Naruto glanced over at Tayuya, taking in her features as she ran. Having removed her hat, her bright red hair billowed out behind her like a flame, whipping and twisting in the wind. His eyes moved to her face, taking in her sharp, feminine features. Small beads of sweat were just beginning to pop out on her forehead and cheeks, making her skin look like it was sparkling in the sunlight. He then glanced down at her pink lips, studying the way they pursed every second or so as she worked to control her breathing. Her smile was one of the most radiant things he'd ever seen in his life. Unfortunately, Tayuya showing her true, unperturbed smile was as rare as Kakashi deciding to be on time, which was close to never. From memory, he could only remember seeing it 3 times, the first time being when she'd gotten her legs back, the second when they played hide-and-go-tag in Jiro's house, and the third when they'd been reunited after a year's time apart. Each time it had made his chest tighten, but that didn't necessarily mean that he was in love with her. If anything, it meant that he was happy for her. Annoyingly, no matter how much he thought about it, he just couldn't clearly pinpoint how he felt about her. He would never want to ruin their friendship by trying to become something more, and besides, he still occasionally thought about Sakura. It was much rarer than it used to be, but she still crossed his mind. Shrugging, he decided that he could think about all of that later. For now, he was happy with just being her friend. Chapter 31. After another 3 long hours of jogging, Naruto and Tayuya made it back to their camp. Predictably, both of their teachers had been there waiting for them, arms crossed and faces completely void of understanding. The teens exchanged wary glances, preparing for the chewing out they were about to receive as they slowed to a stop. Where the hell have you two been? Enko yelled, face dropping into an even angrier scowl. We went off to do some training, Tayuya explained, doing her best to sound as nonchalant as possible while trying to bring her heart rate down to a normal level. Anko's expression remained unchanged. So you left in the middle of the night for almost 9 hours to train? When neither of the genin answered, her frown deepened. She turned her glare solely on Taiyuya. Do you know how much trouble you would have been in if Naruto weren't with you? As long as you're on this training trip, you are not allowed to run around unsupervised. 1,000 push-ups, no breaks, right now. And this is just the beginning of what you're going to do to make up for your stupidity. Taiyuya opened her mouth as if she had something to say but quickly closed it again. No amount of arguing could get them out of this one, that much she was sure of. Besides, some strenuous exercise might help her keep her mind off of her bitch of a grandmother. Sighing loudly, she pulled off her pack and tiredly joined Naruto on the ground, getting to work on her punishment. Anko personally watched them do the first 200 before walking over to where Jiraiya was currently seated in the cave, writing some sort of seal or another. Do you buy it? That they went off to train? The woman asked, leaning over to see what he was working on. Predictably, the paint strokes all looked like gibberish, so she plopped down a few feet away from him. Jiraiya rubbed his chin, face unusually thoughtful. Not at all. However, both of them were acting a little strange when they came back. Almost as if they'd done something they shouldn't have. The woman paused. Something they shouldn't have? Knowing Jiraiya, that could only mean one thing. Anko's eyes popped wide open and she stared over at the exercising teens with disbelief. You don't think? Unfortunately, it's a possibility. They are teenagers, and they do spend an inordinate amount of time together. It was bound to happen sooner or later. Shit, Anko murmured, biting her thumbnail. Shit. Jiraiya nodded his head, agreeing with her reaction. I believe that Tsunade also thought this would happen, and it's probably one of the many reasons she sent Taiyuya on this trip with Naruto. Though if I know Tsunade at all, I don't think that she expected it to happen this fast. Apparently too nervous to stay seated, the Jounin hopped to her feet and began to pace within the narrow confines of the cave. We're jumping to conclusions. Taiyuya wouldn't let that happen. Not in a million years. The raised his eyebrows. Really? A girl who's probably been lonely all of her life suddenly gets close to a boy who, let's face it, is also lonely and cares deeply for her. If this were one of my books, they'd have made love on a riverbank beneath a full moon by now. Anko's face scrunched up as if she'd smelled something foul. That's disgusting. They're children. Taiyuya's 16 now. Even amongst non-shinobi she's no longer a child. I think you should talk to her, Jiraiya suggested, rolling up the scroll he'd been working on. Anko froze. Do you mean talk? When Jiraiya nodded, she crossed her arms under chest and snorted. Since she'd grown up while serving Orochimaru, there was a very good chance that Taiyuya had never actually learned anything about sex or relationships other than what she'd gleaned from books, movies, or other shinobi. She didn't want Taiyuya to learn about it the way she had, since trial and error was risky at best. On the bright side, they'd never have to worry about a baby. Fine, but if I'm going to talk to her, you have to talk to Naruto. I've already given it to him. In fact, we had an in-depth discussion about sex when we went to find Tsunade. I had to make a lot of stops at a lot of brothels, so. Anko held up her hands, face dripping with disgust. You don't have to say any more. Please don't say any more. The woman dropped back to the ground, crossing both of her arms and legs. You know, when I signed up to become a shinobi, I didn't do it to become a babysitter, she spat, obviously displeased with her new task. We're shaping what could very well be the most powerful tandem in Konoha history. Don't you think it'd be worth it to say that you trained them? Pretty words don't work on me, Jiraiya-sama, she said, sarcastically stressing his honorific. Still, she had to admit that it'd be pretty neat to say she had a part in something like that. Making up her mind, she lightly nodded to herself. She'd talk to Taiyuya tomorrow if the chance arose. Sweat pouring down their faces, Naruto and Taiyuya lie face up on the ground, both gasping for breath. After doing 1,000 push-ups, Anko had immediately made them do 1,000 squats, something that they were just now finishing 2 hours later. All things considered, their punishment wasn't too bad. If they hadn't just run over 50 miles up and back from Taiyuya's village, it'd have been a breeze. Eventually their breathing slowed to a normal rate, and Naruto turned his head to look at the girl lying to his right. Her chest was still heaving pretty heavily. To be fair, it was at his eye level, and it was noticeably wet with her sweat. "Na, Tayuya-chan?" he asked, struggling to even say her name. Tayuya narrowed her eyes, noticing the slight pause before he spoke. Whatever he was going to ask her wouldn't be good. "Yeah?" Naruto took a deep breath. He wasn't hoping for much, but he had to ask anyway. "What happened? With your family, I mean?" Tayuya sat up to look at him, studying his expression in the dim light of the cave. It was clear that he was trying not to appear too curious, but unfortunately, he couldn't hide the worried look in his eyes. Rolling her eyes, she shrugged her shoulders and wrapped her arms around her legs. "Whatever, you might as well know since you've already seen my bitch of a grandmother and everything." She sucked in a large breath of air and exhaled slowly, trying to figure out where to begin. "My parents were shinobi. So was my grandmother, even though she's a decrepit old hag now," she started, eyes focusing on something off to his left rather than on him. "We used to be a really powerful clan, but during the Great Shinobi War, most of our members were killed off. The few that were left were hunted down and murdered by their own country for something my parents did. Everyone said my parents were traitors. I don't think they were, though. They killed a fellow shinobi who had gone out of control and was planning to restart the war with Konoha. The problem is, this guy was like some big shot or something with a lot of connections, so the Hidden Rock were kinda pissed at them for taking him out. They burned my house down to smoke them out and then killed my parents. I only survived because my grandmother managed to run away with me while my parents distracted them. It also helped that they didn't know my parents even had a kid." "I'm sorry," Naruto murmured, feeling even more guilty that he was holding her family's scrolls without her knowledge. He wasn't so sure if she'd forgive him like her grandmother had insisted she would. Tayuya shrugged her shoulders, doing her best to appear nonchalant. "It's whatever. My grandmother never taught me much about my clan, and I don't remember anything about my parents except that my dad gave me this hat. Well, my old one anyway." The blonde's mouth dropped open. He was completely stepping all over her family and her memories. He'd never wanted to take back his actions more than he did at this exact moment. "I had no idea. I didn't mean to try to cheapen your dad's gift," he exclaimed, looking positively mortified. Tayuya almost laughed at his expression but managed to reel it in with a supreme amount of effort. "Don't feel bad about it. Like I said before, I really love it. My old hat was the last thing my parents ever gave me, and even if it's a different hat, the feeling's still there." She paused for a second, averting her gaze. "What's up?" Naruto asked, moving over until he was sitting right next to her. His knee accidentally bumped against hers, but neither of them noticed. "Seeing grammar again, it just brought back everything." "Like what?" Tears sprung into her eyes as she turned her head away, awkwardly wiping her eyes on her sleeve. "She used to say that I was stupid, ugly, and worthless up until the day that she kicked me out. I just kind of feel like that when I think about it." If he hadn't known why her grandmother had done it, Naruto would have been furious. Having been subject to that kind of abuse for all of his young life, he knew firsthand how big of an effect words could have on a person, and to have them come from someone you deeply cared for? He couldn't imagine how it made her feel. It also explained a lot about her standoffishness when it came to personal relationships. It had taken him months to get her to trust him, and even now he'd catch her staring at him suspiciously as if trying to figure out what his true motives were. For the first time, he felt like he saw her. To him, Tayuya had always been this immovable, untouchable thing. He hadn't realized it before, but he'd never thought of her as a real person. He'd bought into her bravado and had only seen her as everyone else did instead of trying to see her for who she really was, a normal girl. A strange feeling swelled up in his chest. After having her on this ridiculously stupid pedestal for so long, he didn't know what to think. He was furious with himself for taking so long to even begin to understand her, but he was also relieved to find that she was actually a person. She was just her. Before he himself knew what he was doing, he grabbed her shoulders and pulled her into a tight hug, causing her to let out a gasp at the sudden action. She resisted at first, but he was surprisingly strong for someone with such a wiry frame. Eventually, she relaxed against him, her head nestled comfortably beneath his chin. Shrugging on the inside, she decided that this wasn't so bad. She could trust Naruto with her life, and he would never tell anyone about what was happening. Not if he wanted to avoid the ass-kicking of his life, anyway. "You're super smart, you're beautiful, and you mean everything to me. Anyone who says otherwise has to answer to my fists. Got it? Tayuya was shocked when she felt the back of her eyeballs begin to sting again. Was she really going to cry? Just because he'd said something a little nice? She sniffed lightly and forced a small smirk onto her face. You'd beat up a senile old lady just because she called me some names? The girl joked, biting her lip in a last-ditch effort to stem the tears. Anytime. Unable to stop herself, she felt small droplets of water begin to seep from her eyes, but strangely enough, she also found herself laughing. She knew he'd never actually do it, but it still amused her that he'd put on such a tough guy act just to make her happy. Slowly, her eyes began to close. Between the trip up and back to her village, confronting her grandmother, and the exercise Anko had forced them to endure, she had absolutely no energy left. The last thing she felt was Naruto's arms encircling her as she slipped into a deep slumber. Drip. 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 Tayuya pressed her hands over her ears in an attempt to block out the constant noise, but it was no use. Somehow, the sound of dripping water had the annoying talent of working its way deep into her ear canals. Fucking caves. Why did they have to stay in a cave of all things? Sure, it had been cool at first, but it was still a fucking dirt hole. A fucking leaky dirt hole at that. As she gradually began to wake herself up and gain her bearings, she slowly realized what had happened. She'd slept in Naruto's arms all night. Normally this wouldn't be such a huge deal. She'd woken up with her limbs entangled with Naruto's quite a few times over the years, and while a little awkward, she was always able to laugh it off as the two of them being exceptionally wild sleepers. This time, though, she'd completely opened herself up to him. She told him about her past, her feelings, and her most vulnerable points. They might as well have fucked. At least she'd have fewer morning after regrets. Being careful not to wake him, she eased herself out of his grasp. She stared at his face for a couple of minutes, smiling at how different he looked when he was asleep. Since he had yet to get a haircut, something she'd rectify once they got to the next town, his hair was spread wildly around his head, forming a strange mixture between a halo and a lion's mane. She ran her fingers through the thick mass of blonde, remembering the last time she'd done this in the hospital all those months ago. His hair was just as soft and unruly as it had been back then, if not a little softer. Realizing exactly what she was doing, she quickly dropped her grin and stood up, more than a little embarrassed by her actions. On the bright side, no one had been around to see it. That counted for something. Right? For a few seconds she wondered what she should do, but after sniffing herself, she decided that she needed to bathe. Badly. She was never one to care all that much about how she smelled, but at the same time, even she knew where the line between smelly and fuckus rank was. With that thought in mind, she found her pack and some fresh clothing and slipped out to the river. Judging by the sun, it seemed to be late morning or early afternoon. They'd been more tired than she thought since they'd gone to sleep around 8 or 9 the previous night. She made sure to check every single bush and tree before stripping, and while she did find Anko lying lazily on the grass a dozen meters away, there was no sign of anyone else in the area. Confident that she wouldn't be peeped on, she quickly stripped and plunged herself into the river. The water was cool, but since it was a little hot outside, she didn't mind much. Lathering up with the sweet-smelling soap that she'd bought in the last town, it was specifically made to keep water pollution to a minimum, Tayuya washed her body as quickly as she could. Even if there was no one in the area now, it'd only be a matter of time before Naruto woke up or Jiraiya returned from wherever the hell he was and found her naked. As she bathed, she felt her eyes constantly shift to where Anko was currently lying. Anko had always been somewhat of a voice of reason in her head, so shrugging to herself, she decided that getting her opinion of what had happened wouldn't be a completely horrible idea. With that thought in mind, she awkwardly approached the woman in nothing more than the bath towel she'd accidentally taken from the hotel. Hey, Anko. Yeah, Anko asked, not even glancing up from her magazine. When Tayuya didn't answer right away, she looked up at the girl and narrowed her eyes slightly. What is it? I want to ask you about something. She looked at her with suspicious eyes before fully closing and setting aside the booklet. What? She asked, feeling dread begin to creep into her stomach. Me and Naruto, well, Tayuya fidgeted nervously, suddenly unable to make eye contact with the jounin. The color drained from Anko's face. You didn't. Tayuya nodded her head, looking more ashamed than Anko had ever seen her. It just sort of happened. Fuck, 1 second we're talking about some deep shit, and the next you know. Okay, let's calm down for a second. Just breathe. Shit, I knew I should have done this months ago. I saw you two lying together, but I didn't think it'd go any further than that. Temporarily forgetting about what she was going to discuss, she cocked her head and stared down at the jounin. Done what? This is the perfect time to talk about this. What do you know about sex? The redhead took a shocked step back, instantly realizing where she was going. Are you giving me the talk? It's not the talk. We're just having a casual discussion about sex. The woman coughed uncomfortably, adjusting the collar of her trench coat. Despite saying that it was casual, she felt nervous as hell about this. It wasn't as though she'd ever done it before. Hell, she'd never even gotten the infamous talk. So, are you sexually active? Wah, no! Taiya yelled, face turning a light pink. A breath of relief poured out of Anko. Of course she wouldn't sleep with Naruto. This was Taiya, the girl who'd pushed a toddler down for staring at her the wrong way. Really, she'd seen her do it. She could smack herself for allowing Jiraiya to put such a stupid suggestion in her head. Okay, I know. Look, Taya-chan, I know what it's like to have feelings for someone. You feel like they really understand you, they make you feel good, and hell, maybe they're just really hot. I want you to know that's perfectly normal and happens to everyone. Taiya could only stare at Anko in mortified horror, unable to believe that this was happening. She wanted to speak up and stop this, she really did, but words refused to come out of her mouth. Now, that said, you have to be careful about what you do and with whom. There are diseases you can get from unprotected sex, and trust me, I've seen some bad stuff over the years. Orochimaru himself. That was it. Closing her eyes, Taiya slammed her hands over her ears. Stop. Stop. I don't even want to imagine Orochimaru giving little boys STDs. What? I was just going to say that Orochimaru himself has had to take medication just to keep his soldiers from dying left and right. Get your mind out of the gutter. My point is, you should never do anything without protection, and more importantly, you should only do it with someone that you love and respect and who loves and respects you. Okay? Taiya blinked. So, let me get this straight. Sex is totally okay as long as I use protection and do it with someone who I'm all about. No! That's not what, the woman exclaimed, roughly scratching at her hair. She'd forgotten how hard it was to deal with teenagers. Which was funny because she herself was terrible in her teens. Taya-chan, I forbid you to have sex for at least 2 years. Whatever, there's no one I'd fuck right now anyway. Are we done? Anko, rubbing her forehead to stave the headache quickly forming in her frontal lobe, nodded. Yeah, we're done. Just remember what I said. No sex. Sure thing. The way she'd said it had been completely flippant and insincere, a fact that didn't go unnoticed by Anko. Anko couldn't believe that she was thinking this, but she was way too young for this. Anyway, about you and Naruto cuddling last night. I'm glad for you, and I know this goes without saying after our conversation just now, but do not take this any further. Not until we deal with Orochimaru and the Akatsuki. Okay? When the girl's face suddenly dropped into an angry frown, she quickly moved to explain. You think I'm overreacting, but this is a slippery slope, Taya-chan. A relationship could distract the both of you during battle even if you two don't actually have sex. You've had some near misses in your fights up until now, you know. Taiya's eyes widened in understanding. It all suddenly made sense. You've been interrupting us on purpose. When Anko didn't say anything, the redhead snarled. I don't fucking believe this. All this shit about trusting you and treating you like an older sister, and you've been trying to get in my way this whole time? I know I don't have first-hand experience in this department, but I'm pretty sure families don't do that to each other. You're overreacting. Besides, wasn't it you who told me that you didn't want anything to happen between you and Naruto? Taiya averted her gaze, recalling what had happened the day before. Well, maybe I do now. Not sex, but... Taken aback, Anko felt her mouth drop open. Are you serious? The redhead threw up her hands, too angry and confused to sort out her own feelings. I don't know, maybe. Besides, it's none of your business. I'm not telling you a fucking thing anymore. She couldn't help it, she felt betrayed. Although she was loath to admit it, she'd actually begun to see Anko as an older sister. She hadn't told her much about her early life, but she did occasionally talk with her about stupid things like clothing, music, and sometimes guys. Considering how often Anko talked about her and Naruto getting together, learning that she was intentionally sabotaging them literally blindsided her. Not that she was interested in Naruto that way, but it was the principle of the matter. We're just doing what's best for the both of you, Taiya. You've never really cared about anyone before, so you don't know how emotions can affect you in battle. That's why I wanted you to wait a few years. You know, after the Akatsuki and Orochimaru have been dealt with. You have your whole life ahead of you if you concentrate on training and don't get yourself killed thinking about Naruto all of the time. Unfortunately, the girl wasn't hearing it. If it doesn't have anything to do with training, stay out of my goddamn life. Maybe if you had just been honest from the start, this shit wouldn't even be a big deal. Before Anko could utter another word, the redhead stormed off. Luckily, she just barely remembered to put on clothing before she returned to the cave. 3 chakra-infused kunai embedded themselves deeply into the rock, causing long, splintered cracks to appear on its surface. Just as quickly as they had sunk into the stone, Taiyi used chakra strings to pull them out and send them flying into an adjacent stone, causing that one to completely shatter. The sound of running caught her attention, and she sighed with unhidden annoyance as she recognized who they were. Taiyu-chan. The redhead angrily turned to glare at him. When she saw the concern on his face, her gaze softened. What? She asked, already feeling calmer in his presence. Maybe it was because she'd occasionally slept in his old jumpsuit jackets, but his presence had the unusual side effect of relaxing her. What's wrong? I've been looking everywhere for you. I was worried you ran into some trouble. She wanted to stay angry, she really did. Her fits usually lasted for at least an hour, but with Naruto staring at her with his furrowed brows and annoyingly wide blue eyes, she felt all of her rage whittling down into nothing. Dropping her shoulders in defeat, she sighed loudly. Sorry, I was just thinking about something. Are you okay? I'll get over it. To his surprise, Taiya suddenly threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. Taiya now he was concerned. It was rare that she ever initiated any physical contact, and for it to be a hug of all things freaked him the fuck out. He was actually beginning to wonder if it was even Taiya and not some Yamanaka who'd taken over her body. Then again, he'd just come to terms with the fact that he didn't really know her well at all, so maybe this was who she was deep down. Shut up for once, she mumbled into his shirt, gripping the fabric tightly in her fingers. A part of her was doing this as a mini revenge against Anko, but a larger part just wanted to make the aching in her chest go away. So far, the only foolproof method to make her not want to kill everyone seemed to be Naruto. Still worried, he raised his arms and wrapped them around her smaller form. After a few seconds, she spoke again. Don't ever lie to me. Naruto winced. That was a tall order. There were a lot of things he was hiding from her, and even more things he hadn't been completely honest about. Besides some of the people he'd met, he hadn't at all mentioned anything about his time in Kumo. Hell, he hadn't even told her much about what he'd learned, mostly because she'd throw the hissiest of fits if she ever found out. Or, to be more accurate, when she found out. However, he had to make a split-second decision. Deciding that exclusion wasn't technically lying, he guiltily grit his teeth and replied. Okay. Ever since they'd arrived in the Earth Country, Taiya and Naruto had been learning how to keep a stone afloat using only the chakra coming from their fingertips in order to strengthen their chakra control. According to Anko, their chakra capacity was growing faster than they were able to control it. At first, the genin had been annoyed by the task since it seemed utterly useless in the grand scheme of things. They'd have much rather spent the time learning some badass, explosive new jutsu. However, once Taiya had accidentally cut her stone in half with the chakra, the teens instantly decided to name the skill finger knife and had been chopping anything they could get their hands on in half. After a week or so, they'd even learned how to get 2 chakra knives going on 2 separate fingers and were currently trying to increase the number to 3. Anko and Jiraiya couldn't complain much since the teens were strengthening their chakra control and it was an admittedly useful skill, but it was still somewhat unnerving to know that the genin could chop off all of their hair with only a swipe of the finger, and they'd be none the wiser. Naruto and Taiya were currently sitting cross-legged on the ground, juggling 3 stones on 2 fingers. To the average dumbass it'd look like they were using telekinesis, something Tayuya was already planning to abuse at the next town to score some pocket change. Not bad, I think you two have got it, Enko said with a proud grin on her face. Your progress is much better than Jiraiya and I predicted. Where is Ero-Sennin anyway? Tayuya panted, leaning lazily on Naruto. Even if they weren't using much chakra, that kind of focus always tired her out. Almost instantly, he leaned his larger body against hers to help hold her up. The action didn't go unnoticed by Enko, who frowned slightly at their proximity. If she didn't know any better, she'd say that Tayuya was intentionally trying to spite her. He's meeting up with a friend. He should be back within the next couple of days, so until then, we'll keep training. A friend? Tayuya asked, noticing the small smirk that had popped up on the woman's face. What kind of friend? A friend who's going to help you become stronger. At this, Naruto instantly became excited. What's he gonna teach us? Enko shrugged mysteriously, an impish grin appearing on her face. Nothing yet. We don't even know if they'd be willing to help. Not everyone can afford to drop everything to teach a couple of brats how to not get themselves killed. Hey! Naruto yelled, scowling at Enko. Anyway, it's almost sunset, so you're done for the day. Rest is also an important part of getting stronger. Giving Tayuya one last warning glare, she walked off to presumably take her own advice. Shortly after Enko left, Tayuya headed in the opposite direction. Naruto watched the girl's bright red hair bounce as she walked away. Where are you going? You're not my babysitter. Despite saying that, she held up her flute case. I'm going to practice playing my flute. We're supposed to rest. Chill the fuck out, I'm just gonna work on my song some more. At this, Naruto perked up. You're writing a new song? Can I hear it? No! She yelled a little bit too loudly. She cleared her throat and glanced away. I mean, it's not finished yet. It sounds stupid right now. That's impossible. You're too good for it to sound stupid. She felt her cheeks heat up. All of the compliments he'd been giving her lately were starting to get annoying. True, but you still can't hear it yet. Naruto childishly scrunched up his face. Fine, I see how it is, he sniffed, walking off in a pretend huff. Rolling her eyes, Tayuya watched him leave. What are you gonna do? Meditate, I guess. It calms me down. Tayuya slowly nodded her head. Okay, I'll see you back at the campsite later. The blonde sighed. He felt bad for lying to her, especially since he just promised that he wouldn't, but she wouldn't get it. Not now. Besides, it wasn't a full lie. He was, technically, meditating. Finding a relatively secluded spot in between two large rocks, Naruto plopped down and closed his eyes. He didn't bother to assume any kind of sitting position since, as he'd learned from the mistress of meditating herself, sitting with your legs crossed and your palms up makes you look like a pompous, posing asshole. As his heartbeat gradually began to slow to a crawl, the darkness behind his eyelids slowly turned into a surprisingly well-lit sewer. Once he was able to gain control of his inner self, Naruto followed the familiar orange glow at the end of the hallway until he was standing directly in front of the sleeping Kyuubi's cage. Hey, bastard fox, wake up. I know you heard me come in. You've been getting cozy with that wench of yours, the fox rumbled, not bothering to open his eyes and address him. If Naruto didn't know any better, he'd say that Kyuubi was teasing him. Sure, they'd come to a bit of an understanding, but they weren't exactly buddy-buddy enough to start cracking jokes at each other's expense. Shut up, it's time to train. At the mention of training, the Nine-Tails finally yawned and opened his eyes. He stood to his feet and shook himself, looking disturbingly similar to an ordinary canine. Without saying a word, the fox closed his eyes and began to expel his energy. The red chakra slowly seeped between the bars, bubbling up into a frothy, red cloud. The chakra swirled around Naruto and began to envelop him until it covered his entire body, causing the blonde to wince. The strange part is that it wasn't so much painful as it was hot. He grit his teeth, struggling to filter the good chakra from the demon's evil energy. Just as he was starting to get the hang of it, Kyuubi began to speak. You should try to mount your bitch. Can't you see the way she looks at you? She wants it. The genin almost choked on his spit. Shut up, Naruto mumbled, closing his eyes tighter in an attempt to block out both the demon's voice and the image that was trying to worm its way into his mind. Undeterred, the Kyuubi continued. Your children would be powerful. Think about it, your stamina, her genjutsu talent, and my power flowing through their veins. You would be a dynasty. Your family would rule Konoha and the shinobi world for generations to come. He roared. His voice echoed in the small room, adding an invisible weight to his statement. It was then that Naruto realized he was losing control. He quickly cut off the flow of chakra and backed away from the cage, forcing out the last remnants of evil chakra. Even though he'd cut the session short, he still managed to increase his chakra capacity a bit. Nice try, Furball, but it's not that easy to distract me. If it weren't for the fact that he was a huge, evil, mass-murdering demon, he'd think that the Kyuubi was pouting. That's enough for today. Think about it, brat. You know what I'm saying is true. Yeah, Naruto drawled, flipping the demon off as he exited the corridors of his mind. Even though he just learned that there was more to Tayuya than what he'd previously thought, there was absolutely no way she was interested in him that way. Hell, even if she was, it'd be way too weird for them to do anything since they were such close friends. That's all they were, after all. Close friends. Chapter 32. Alright, get ready, Tayuya said, raising her flute to her lips. She felt a little bad about using one of her more terrible on him, but he needed to get used to them. The haunting melody flowed from the instrument, and she slowly began to thread chakra into the tune. Mugen Ansa, she thought, activating the technique. As soon as the tune reached his ears, dozens of chains wrapped around arms constricting his movements. His skin began to melt off of his bones, and even though he knew it was a genjutsu and he knew how to stop it, it just wasn't working. His chakra control was just too out of sorts. Unable to take the pain anymore, he mentally formed a Kage Bunshin to thrust a kunai into his leg. It tired him out a lot more to make a Kage Bunshin without a seal, but it was the best he could do. He was really growing tired of having to stab himself just to break her illusions, and the whole forced chakra disruption thing was spotty at best. The only advantage he had was that Kyuubi's evil, red, chakra naturally disrupted his own pure, light blue chakra, but even that wasn't good enough for a genjutsu as powerful as hers. Tayuya quickly walked to his side, applying pressure to the rapidly closing wound. Are you okay? Naruto stared at her hand on his leg before glancing up to look into her eyes. I always am. A smile flitted across her face. Good. When she removed her hand, the wound had already sealed itself into just a faint pink line. She wiped away the small amount of blood left and scoffed at him. You're so lucky. I wish I could heal most of my wounds in 5 minutes. 3.5. Now you're just bragging. A small, cocky smirk appeared on Naruto's face. Just telling it like it is. He pushed a strand of her long red hair behind her ear to run his finger over a nearly non-existent cut he'd accidentally given her the day before. You heal pretty quickly, too. Before she could reply, something in the distance caught her attention. She saw the familiar shock of white hair before anything else, and the entirely too loud clack of sandals on the ground brought wide smiles to both of their faces. The teens hopped up and ran over to him, circling him like sharks. Ero-senin, did you bring back anything cool? Naruto shouted, bouncing on his toes. Jiraiya almost smirked at how childlike the two of them looked as they stared up at him with large, hopeful eyes. Afraid not. Both teens simultaneously pouted, and this time the man did smirk. But guess where we're going next? The genin perked up a bit, their sadness temporarily overridden by their curiosity. Where? Tayuya asked. To Sunagakure. Tayuya's face instantly fell. Well, shit. Unless she was either dead or on an extremely long mission, there was a 99.9% chance that she would run into the bitch that had nearly killed her all those months ago. A few seconds later, her displeasure quickly gave way to elation. Wait. This was it. This was her chance to get the bitch back for all of the pain and suffering she'd had to endure after the fight, and oh, would she get her. She reasoned that she couldn't kill her, but no one would think twice if she accidentally broke both of her legs and an arm in a friendly spar. It was, after all, an occupational hazard. Noticing the evil grin that was slowly spreading across his teammate's face, Naruto quickly put two and two together, and realized exactly what she was thinking. Tayuya-chan, you can't try to hurt Temari. She blinked lightly, slightly surprised that he'd been able to figure her out just based on her expression. It was kind of creepy. It's not like you can stop me. Yeah, but if she hadn't kicked your ass, you'd still be with Orochimaru, and we wouldn't be friends. His statement stopped her evil plans in their tracks. Not for the first time she wondered what would have happened if Temari hadn't flattened her under a forest, and it honestly frightened her to think of what her life would be like right now. Sure, she'd have been promoted for delivering the faggot Uchiha, but what else would she have? The rest of her team was dead, everyone else in the Sound Village were complete idiots, and Orochimaru would be too busy turning Sasuke into his new Halloween costume to give her any attention. She'd be completely alone. Yeah, she'd be allowed to do whatever the hell she wanted, but in the end that wouldn't have made her happy. Probably. She felt a fresh wave of appreciation towards everyone who'd helped her get to this point, including the sand bitch. Sighing deeply, she crossed her arms over her chest. Whatever, I'm still going to get her back, she spat, though her tone was noticeably less angry. Naruto grinned. I can't wait to see Gaara again. Last time we didn't get to really talk since he had to go back home right after the mission, but now we can spend tons of time together. It's gonna be great. Suddenly thinking of something, he curiously looked up at the man. How long were we staying there, anyway? Well, with the Akatsuki on the move and the trip coming to an end, we can't stay in one place for too long. 2 months at the most. The blonde's smile widened. That's plenty of time. Anko suddenly appeared from behind him, wrapping him up in a hug and pushing her chest against his back. When Tayuya frowned, she couldn't help but let out a small smirk. Don't get too happy, Naruto-chan. You're gonna be working your butt off the entire time. Doing what? Tayuya asked, forcing her way into the conversation. For some reason, it bugged her whenever Naruto talked to other women. Especially when that woman was currently molesting him. Well, with Naruto's element being wind, it's only natural that we venture into the wind country to find him a suitable teacher, don't you think? Jiraiya said. The girl shrugged. Makes sense. What about me? Anko gave her an apologetic smile. Sorry to disappoint you, Taya-chan, but there really isn't much else we can teach you right now, and especially not in a couple of months. You can only expand upon the things that you already know. Tayuya's face noticeably fell at this bit of information. She knew the trip was first and foremost for Naruto, but seriously, they couldn't teach her anything? Was it because she was still under suspicion for being an enemy, and they didn't want to teach her too much in case she turned against them? She wouldn't blame them if that was the case, but they could at least tell her the truth. Actually, Naruto mumbled, drawing the attention of the others. What? You have something to teach me? Tayuya joked. Rather than reply, he turned his attention to his sensei. Hey, Ero-sennin, it's getting dark. Can we start dinner? The old man rubbed his chin, squinting as he looked up at the sky. As if deciding something to himself, he nodded his head. Might as well. Right afterwards, Anko and I will scrounge up some supplies since we're nearly out of everything. With that plan in mind, they quickly returned to their campsite and prepared dinner as night fell. Eventually, Jiraiya and Anko left to go to the nearest town for supplies, so Naruto figured it was as good of a time as any to give her the items that were owed to her. He reached into his pack and procured the 2 scrolls that were given to him by her grandmother. Since we're far enough away now, I guess it's safe to give you these. Arching her eyebrows, Tayuya grabbed the offered scrolls. What's this? He paused, not sure how to tell her. He was relieved to finally be rid of them, but still felt kind of a jerk. Deciding to just tell her, he sighed and rubbed his hand through his long blonde hair. Your family's scrolls. I got them from your grandmother. She held the parchments limply in her hand, eyes staring blankly in his direction. You what? She told me to wait until we were outside of the Earth country to give them to you. A short breath escaped his lips. If he didn't explain this correctly, there was no telling what could happen next. Tayuya-chan, your grandmother really loves you. She did this so you wouldn't go back there. She wants you to be happy and live your life for yourself. As if she hadn't heard a word he said, the girl reached for her pack and began to throw her things back into it. I have to go back. Naruto grabbed her wrist, steely blue eyes staring into hers. No. Let me go. When he refused, she struggled against his hold, anger growing more and more with each passing second. Tayuya-chan, calm down. Remember that they'll have to take you back to Konoha if you try to leave. At this, her fighting weakened. With only a few months left until they got back to Konoha, she didn't want to stop here. Not when they were so close to being finished. It was at that moment that Naruto chose the worst time to continue speaking. Your grandmother just wants what's best for you. That's what families do for each other. Tayuya lost it. What the fuck do you know? You've never even had a family. As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. The hurt that flashed across his face sapped the energy from her body. She'd said, in not so many words, the same exact thing Sasuke had said to him at the Valley of the End. Sorry, she mumbled after a few tense seconds. It's okay. Just by looking at his face, she could tell that it wasn't. He released her arms and sat back down, grabbing his food to continue eating. She noticed the slow, deliberate way he ate, but she was still too angry and shocked to care. His depressing atmosphere was beginning to get to her, so she silently stood up and stepped off into the forest with the scrolls to read them alone. After a few minutes of walking, she managed to find a particularly bright clearing where the moon was strong enough to read by, so she unceremoniously plopped down directly in the middle. She opened the scroll, and to her surprise, a worn, rolled-up note slipped. Her name, and curious, she unrolled it. Her eyes widened as she realized that it was a note addressed to her from her parents. Tayuya. If you are reading this, chances are, we've passed away. Hopefully your grandmother was able to provide an adequate life for you, and if possible, she didn't pass on her filthy mouth. She can be harsh at times, but she loves you just as much as we do and would do anything to make you happy. There are a few things we would like to say to you. First, do not seek vengeance. Don't perpetuate the hatred caused by a generation of fools and liars. You come from a family of greats and have the strength and ability to change the world for the better. Second, do not become a shinobi. It's a life filled with blood and tears, and neither of us want you to go through the terrible things we did. We realize this is a tall order considering the world we live in, and chances are, you've already begun training by now. If this is true, please use the family scrolls to further your knowledge and skill. Third, be happy. Find love. Raise a family if it suits you, but more importantly, don't isolate yourself. People can be harsh, cruel, and untrustworthy, but find those who aren't. Surround yourself with people who love and cherish you. Your life will be much happier that way. We love you so much, and it hurts more than you know that we weren't there to see you grow up into the fine young woman we know you are. Love. Mom and Dad. As she finished the letter, large, fat tears began to roll down her cheeks. Before she knew it, she was sobbing. She really thought she was done crying over how shitty her family was, but to know that these two strangers, people she didn't even remember, cared about her so much was more than she could take. She assumed that her parents loved her, but to see them actually write it was something else entirely. Another thing that surprised her was how good her parents were. She didn't necessarily think that they were bad people, but she certainly wasn't expecting them to be the visionaries that they made themselves out to be. It made her feel even worse about the path she'd taken after joining Orochimaru. She tried her best to limit her sobs, but it was no use. She was angry, sad, and happy all at once. Over a dozen years of emotion seemed to be pouring out of her faster than she could control them. Eventually, she was able to calm down enough to stand. She was exhausted. Her eyes and nose hurt from too much wiping, and she was certain that she looked like an absolute mess. This time for sure, she was done crying. It was ugly, stupid, and useless, but most importantly, it wasn't who she was. She was stronger than this, and if she was going to cry over something, it wouldn't be the past. She slipped into the sleeping bag with Naruto, finding herself wanting to be close to someone. Are you okay? He asked, a little too clearly for someone who was supposedly sleeping. Why didn't you just tell me earlier? He was silent for a few minutes. Just when she thought he had fallen asleep again, he answered. Maybe I was being selfish. I knew you'd want to stay with your grandmother, but I wanted you to stay here. With me. She punched him on the back. You were definitely being selfish. I like it though. Naruto felt an unfamiliar feeling in his chest. Her words hadn't been anything special, but the way she'd said it had seemed almost flirtatious. He pushed himself up to stare at her, only to see that her eyes were closed. He wanted to inquire further, but he was too afraid to know what the answer would be. "Tayuya-chan," he whispered, lightly shaking her shoulder. The girl rolled over onto her back. "What?" she hissed, eyes glaring up at him sleepily. A few seconds later, her eyes were wide open and she was out of the sleeping bag, kneeling on one knee. Her hand reached back into the bag for her weapons pouch, strapping it onto her shorts. "Where?" 7 and 4, he mumbled, eyes darting around the treetops for any sign of movement. "They can't be too good if we know they're here. Either that, or they want us to know." "Why would they want us to know?" "Intimidation. They could be trying to confuse us, and there's probably more than 2 of them out there. Where's Anko and Erosenin? Did they get back yet?" Naruto shook his head, strapping his sword to his waist. "Think it's them, then? Maybe testing us?" Tayuya whispered. Before he could answer, for kunai was towards them. Thinking quickly, Naruto unsheathed his sword and knocked them all out of the air. 3 shuriken immediately followed, and grabbing a kunai, Tayuya easily sent them spiraling harmlessly towards the ground. Unfortunately, the teens were late in noticing the explosive tags attached to the weapons. Kaige Bunshin no Jutsu. 10 shadow clones instantly appeared and made a hasty wall around them, absorbing most of the blast. They flew 10 or so feet before rolling and spinning themselves onto their feet, both crouched down into the same defensive stance. "If it is them, they're not messing around," Naruto mumbled, wincing at the painful scorch mark on his forearm. Luckily, it was already healing and would hopefully be gone within the hour. "Let's assume it's not. Send some clones into the trees to test their skills and change a few of them to look like me. I'll create a diversion and blend in with them to start setting up traps from 12 to 5. In the meantime, make another clone of me and keep it here to hold their attention." "I'm going into the trees too, then," he whispered. Tayuya shrugged. "If you want." She paused, remembering the last time they were attacked. "Let's try to stick to basic techniques for now. Someone may be trying to get a feel for our abilities." With that, she reached into her pouch and grabbed a few smoke bombs, discreetly throwing them down onto the ground to create a smoke screen. She glanced back to see she and Naruto still in the clearing, surrounded by 10 or so more clones. She smirked at his forethought. By creating more clones in the clearing, he could make them think the smoke was from his jutsu rather than the bombs. She landed on a branch and immediately got to work setting up traps, moving as quickly as she could to avoid being noticed by their enemies. Thanks to constant practice and, to be honest, boredom during the time she and Naruto had spent apart, she'd managed to get her trap building time down to roughly 10 seconds depending on the complexity. Since she didn't have much time, she decided to use the simplest traps she knew. Explosives would probably draw the attention of Jiraiya and Anko if they were anywhere in the area, which is exactly what they needed. She finished setting up the traps in roughly 3 minutes, being careful to hide whenever she heard someone getting close. A little worried about Naruto, she jumped back into the trees to try to locate him. To her surprise, there were 3 separate battles already going on. Rather than jump into the fray, she decided to hang back and support him from afar. She started to pull out her flute but decided against it, remembering her earlier warning to Naruto about showing off their skills. Since that limited them to weapons, taijutsu, and some basic ninjutsu, it would be a challenge. She threw a handful of shuriken at the fighting shinobi, smirking slightly when one of them managed to graze an enemy. It wouldn't have been such a big deal except the shuriken had been tipped with snake venom, courtesy of Anko. Unsurprisingly, the man instantly tore after her, much to her pleasure. As she fled, she dropped a smoke bomb behind her, masking both her path and his. She knew he was heading towards her first trap, so she dropped to the forest floor, fighting back another smirk when she heard the explosions above her. This was almost too easy. Had they really gotten that good? A few dozen meters away, the real Naruto was locked in a battle with a large, particularly muscular shinobi. The man was good, easily Chunin level, and more than likely a jounin. He wasn't wearing a headband, but the way he fought was depressingly familiar. He was from the Leaf Village. "Katon, Karya Endin!" the man yelled, spitting a stream of fire in his direction. Kaige Bunshin no Jutsu. 15 shadow clones appeared in front of him. They all scattered in different directions, every single one of them managing to avoid the attack. The man looked around the forest, annoyed by having to chase him down. Fucking kids. He couldn't, for the life of him, understand why he was being sent on such a stupid mission. Even if he was the QB container, he was still a brat. They weren't even allowed to kill him. He was ripped from his thoughts by the presence of something behind him. Was this kid really trying to sneak up on him? He spun around and threw a lazy kick, just knowing he would send the kid flying headfirst into the nearest tree. When he hit nothing but air, he furrowed his brows. Raisin Gan! The ball of chakra hit the main square in the chest. He spun towards the ground at an awkward angle, hitting it with a sickening thud, only to turn into a small log. Big mistake, kid. The man began to form a chain of hand seals. Katan, Gakakyu no Jutsu. Naruto's eyes widened. He knew that jutsu, and as a result, he knew that he needed to get the fuck out of there as fast as he could. He jumped off of the tree and threw himself at the ground, just barely dodging the giant ball of fire as it whizzed over his head. He managed to turn his body enough to roll into a crouch and avoid the rain of kunai that landed where he'd been only a millisecond earlier. You're out of your league, brat. The small, knowing smirk that appeared on Naruto's face instantly set the man on edge. Boom, the blonde said, snapping his fingers. The man barely had time to widen his eyes and pull the tag off before it exploded in his hand. When? He managed to mumble through the mouthful of blood. The vest had absorbed some of the blast, but he was still missing half an arm. It's a good thing you managed to switch places with that log before you felt any real contact from my Rasengan, huh? You managed to do it that fast? Naruto steeled his gaze. Who do you work for? Cute, the man said, smirking despite his pain. Naruto waltzed over to the fallen shinobi. He picked up one of the man's kunai on the way, twirling it around by its ring. I'm not really proud of everything I've learned these past few years. I haven't even told my best friend about some of my skills. The man snorted. I'm supposed to care here, right? Despite saying that, he was really starting to become afraid. Maybe it was the blood loss, the boy's cold, calculating gaze, or the feeling of impending death, but something told him that he had roughly 5 minutes to make his peace with the gods. I couldn't tell her, you know? He came to a stop in front of him and crouched down. It had hurt her too much. It hurts me to do this too, but I have to protect her. You can understand that, right? What the fuck are you talking about? Naruto slammed the kunai into the man's leg, eliciting a surprisingly girly scream from his victim's throat. Who do you work for? It's obvious you're from Konoha. I can see it in the way you move. Are you also from Root? You think a stab in the leg is enough to make me talk? No, I was just trying to be nice about it. He closed his eyes when he opened them again, they were red. If I put even an ounce of my chakra into your body, you will feel a pain you didn't think possible as the QB's chakra systematically takes over and destroys yours. It's the most agonizing feeling on earth according to the last person I did this to. Once I put some of this in your body, you'll have about 5 minutes before it's too late for me to take the chakra back. In 5 minutes, it'll make it to your heart and kill you. Well? He wanted to tell him, he really did. It wasn't even his sense of duty that was stopping him. No, it was the fact that this brat was acting like he was hot shit that made him so obstinate. Suck my cock, demon. Have it your way. He gripped the kunai in the man's leg, and concentrating as hard as he could, directed a large amount of his chakra down the kunai and into the cut. The man let loose the most painful scream he'd ever heard. After 5 seconds, he broke down. I got it. I'll tell you. Naruto raised his eyebrow, nodding for him to continue. I work for Danzo. We weren't trying to kill you, honest. He just wanted us to evaluate your skills. Really? I swear on my life. A wry smile appeared on Naruto's face. What? I'm sorry, I can't take out the chakra by myself. I need a medic need to stabilize your heart or else you'll die. You little prick, the man gasped out between pain breaths. Nothing personal, I just have to protect Tayuya-chan. He formed a few hand seals, and shortly afterwards, his hands glowed a mild green. What are you doing? making your last few minutes a little easier. He placed his hands on the man's forehead, and after barely a second, the man's eyes closed and his body relaxed as he fell into a coma. Naruto closed his own eyes briefly to say a short prayer. He really hated taking a life, no matter who it was. Giving the man one last, sad glance, he took off back to the trees. Naruto? A voice called from behind him. He spun around in mid-jump to see the redhead a dozen or so meters behind him, her bright red hair billowing out behind her as she tried to catch up. Very little could compare to the relief he felt at seeing that she was okay. Where are the other guys? She asked, eyes scanning the forest. I killed one. You? Same. Where's the third one? The blonde shook his head. I felt his presence during my fight, but it disappeared towards the end. Probably to report back to Danzo. More of Danzo's guys? Seriously? You think they'd have learned by now after we wiped them out last time? She paused for a short second, angrily remembering Juro's death. She suddenly snapped her head around to look at Naruto. Do you think we could chase him down before he gets back to Konoha? The teens exchanged glances, and after a couple of seconds, two slow smiles appeared on their faces. Simultaneously, they dropped their weights, and the indentations they made in the earth made them both laugh. Naruto stared over at her. Ready? Rather than answer, she took to the trees, the blonde right on her heels. Monsters, both of them. The man mumbled to himself, a sweat breaking out on his forehead. He regretted not sending a messenger bird off to Danzo, but he honestly hadn't expected things to go so badly so fast. He figured they'd show up, smack the kids around a bit, and then return to Konoha to receive a little praise from Danzo and the rest of Root for taking down the Kyuubi. The last team they'd sent had been weak, and it was sort of expected that they'd lose, but shit. The brat had actually tortured him. The files they'd received were misleading. The fact that they were genin had caused them to massively underestimate the teens, and Naruto's character description had described him as dumb, easily confusable, naive, but extremely durable. He hadn't seen any of that tonight. That's not very nice, an amused voice said from his left, shocking him out of his thoughts. He glanced over to see the redhead casually jumping side by side with him. He tried to change directions, but as he looked to his right, he saw Kyuubi smiling at him with a mischievous grin of his own. Yeah, it kind of hurts our feelings. The last thing he heard was a strange, haunting melody, and the last thing he saw before he blacked out was a large rock heading directly towards him as he barreled to the ground. 85,000, 95,000, 105,000 yen. Taiuya exclaimed, shuffling through the money. Holy fuck, these guys were loaded. After killing the last shinobi, the redhead had come up with the bright idea of raiding the dead bodies for cash, weapons, and any other useful items. They'd also managed to locate the shinobi's supplies hidden in the hollow of a tree. Besides money, their enemies had a large amount of weapons and rations on them, camouflage gear, and some camping supplies including a foldable fishing rod. There was also a small collapsible chess set, much to Taiuya's delight. She'd deny it if asked, but it was her favorite game. Naruto, we're fucking strong. We're definitely stronger than the average jounin now, she said, smiling at him. The blonde shrugged. I guess. It just feels a little wrong taking all of their personal stuff, but it's not like they're gonna get much use out of it now. Right? Duh. If they didn't want us to have it, they shouldn't have gotten themselves killed. Naruto gave her a disapproving frown, but shrugged shortly afterwards. She actually kind of had a point. Geez, she was starting to rub off on him. What was that jutsu you used on the last guy? Oh, that? That was nothing. It's just a little tune to knock someone out. Why didn't it hit me? I heard it too. Yeah, but the technique is nothing without chakra, you know, and I didn't aim it at you. That makes sense, I guess. The blonde yawned widely. Since they'd been woken up by the surprise attack, he was still tired. I'm going back to sleep. What about you? Yeah, I'll lie down for a little bit. Leave me some room. Taiuya watched him go with a frown. He was surprisingly okay with the fact that they just killed 3 people. The Naruto she knew would have been much more upset, and would still be bitching about taking a life. There was something he wasn't telling her. She pulled the picture from her pocket, frowning sadly at it. The shinobi Naruto had killed had a daughter, and she looked to be around 4 at the most. She'd been sure to hide it from Naruto lest he feel even more guilty, since hell, even she felt bad. She knew what it was like to lose a father, and she idly wondered if the girl would grow up to become a kunoichi and try to take revenge on them. She closed her eyes and made a small promise to herself before tossing the picture into the slowly dying fire. Right afterwards, she walked over to where Naruto was sleeping and slipped into the sleeping bag with him. He felt her snuggle in behind him, making him feel a little more uncomfortable than he'd cared to admit. It didn't help that for someone who'd just finished killing and looting 3 people, she smelled extremely nice. Kind of like strawberries. Naruto started, feeling a little awkward having her so close. It's cold. Her arms wrapped around his torso like he was a giant teddy bear. This was definitely new for her since she rarely initiated physical contact. What's wrong? He asked. You know how sometimes we have to kill people? When she felt him nod, she continued. Well, I mean, we're killing people. People like you and me. I've never thought about it much before now, but those people probably have friends. Families. I think about that all the time. It's why I try not to kill anyone if I can help it. But if it's between me killing them and them killing you, I won't hesitate. You're a part of my family, and they know the risks of being a shinobi just like we do. Are you saying that you'd kill for me? She asked, amusement heavy in her voice. Thanks though. That helped. With what? When she didn't answer right away, he turned over until he was facing her, body almost flushing against hers due to their proximity. Naruto felt his heart thump faster in his chest. He didn't know why, but he felt extremely nervous now that they were facing each other. He looked at her face to see that her eyes were closed. His body gradually began to relax as he realized that she was fast asleep, and he smirked at the one habit she just couldn't seem to kick. She was still a drooler. Naruto awoke to see Taiya kneeling in front of the fire, preparing breakfast for the 2 of them. He sat up and just watched her for a couple of minutes, studying the smooth and efficient way she moved. He could tell that there was still something bothering her, but she'd apparently worked something out with herself over the course of the night. As much as he wanted to pry, he knew that everyone had their secrets. Morning, she said, smiling at him from over the flames. He loved it when she smiled. She always looked like a completely different person. Morning. What's for breakfast? Those guys we fucked up had some rice, so I'm just making something easy, fish, tamagoyaki, and rice. Cool, I love your tamagoyaki. She'd first demonstrated her newly gained cooking prowess at one of Jiraiya's friends' houses. She had insisted on cooking dinner for everyone, and with only Anko helping her, managed to pull off a surprisingly delicious meal. Granted, none of it really went together, but each individual item was pretty amazing. Everyone does. I'm like a master or something. Naruto rolled his eyes. And you wonder why I don't give you compliments? Because you know I'll punch you in the face? That too. She handed him some rice before making herself a bowl, joining him on the log in front of the fire. At that moment, Anko and Jiraiya walked into the campsite, each of them carrying a large bag. Something smells good. What's for breakfast? Hey, where'd you guys get the rice from? I thought we were out. You were holding out on us? She grabbed a helping of the food for herself, squeezing in on the log next to Taiya. Actually. They spent the next 10 minutes explaining what happened, being careful not to leave anything out. It took a supreme amount of effort not to brag about how easy it was, but they somehow managed to pull it off. Jiraiya sighed. It's a good thing you were able to catch him, or else Danzo probably would have sent more after you. It'll probably be a couple of weeks before they start to get suspicious, and if we're lucky, they haven't sent word that we're headed towards Suna yet. If we can stay off the radar until we get close to Konoha, that would be ideal. Still, I can't believe you 2 were able to take down 3 rude officers. You didn't show them everything you could do, did you? Anko asked. The redhead frowned. Fuck, give us a little credit here. We're not completely stupid. But you are stupid, Anko smirked. Taiya stuck out her tongue at the woman before shoveling another mouthful of rice in her mouth. She'd be upset, but she was far too proud of the job she and Naruto had done. Even if they'd caught one of them off guard, they'd relatively easily taken down at least Chunin-level ninja using only their basic skills. She glanced up at him and grinned, widening her smile when he winked and returned it. Noticing this, Anko raised her eyebrows. Does anything else happen? Tayuya shrugged. Not really, why? She suddenly leaned forward and reached towards Naruto's face, grabbing a piece of rice off of his face and eating it. Why the fuck were you so messy? Okay, now you're just being annoying. About what? If you really don't know, then I don't either. Anko tossed her leftovers into the fire, standing up and stretching in the process. Hurry up and pack. We're behind schedule. Both teens shoveled their remaining food into their mouths and sprinted towards their gear, eager to get to Sunagakure as soon as possible. For different reasons, of course. Thanks for watching, Shinobi Squad. If you enjoyed this what if, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next twist. Drop your theories in the comments, I'm always reading. Want more Naruto heat? Check out the other videos on the channel. Stay sharp, stay awesome, and remember, even shadow clones need love.